and that will be a concern for many members across this House, and I would encourage him to apply for a debate in the usual way.
According to a UK finance report, push payment fraud rose by 39% last year. Wow. That's no surprise to me, having spent the summer discussing this with affected constituents. So I think that more teeth are needed. We need to find a way to make sure we have proper redress for consumers and businesses affected, and a way of dealing with banks who are hosting the accounts which are benefiting from these high-value frauds. So can we have a debate in government time on what more can be done here to make sure that we put an end to this very damaging and increasing fraud?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises an important issue. I know that this has been a focus for the Treasury in recent months, and certainly that if she would apply for a debate, I'm sure many members would wish to contribute.
Liz Truss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Sunday marks World Suicide Prevention Day. And yesterday, I, along with the Right Honourable Member for North Durham, met Matthew from If You Care Share, who is raising funds to support the work of the charity, running from Durham to 10 Downing Street. Can I ask for a debate in government time so that we can discuss suicide and self-harm prevention and the government's revision of the strategy?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising that important issue, and I wish her constituent well on his mission to raise awareness and funds for this important cause. I will happily raise the issue with the relevant Secretary of State, and I'm sure if she were to secure a debate, and I would encourage her to apply for one, many members of this House would wish to contribute.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the summer, like many other members, I'm sure, my office team have continued to experience considerable delays in contacting the MP account management team at UK Visas and Passport Office. Twice in the last few days, staff have spent over 2 hours on the phone getting to an advisor, and then the advisor are not able to give information, only read from a screen and not give assistance on complex cases. So could I ask the Leader of the House please to arrange a debate in government time to talk about what action the government can take to ensure members are provided with the support so that we in turn can give that support to our constituents?
Well, he will know that the Home Office has done a huge amount to improve this service, taking on in recent months over 1,000 new staff to be able to process such applications. But he is right, there is no point in having an MP's service and hotline if answers are not at the end of it, and I shall certainly continue to ensure the Home Office is able to deliver the services that members of this House need and would welcome.
Welcome the Leader to her place. My office are currently supporting several single mothers who continue to struggle with the child maintenance system because the support in chasing down avoiding paying parents or enforcing repayment of large arrears just doesn't exist in a meaningful way within the current system. Will the Leader of the House ask the new Work and Pension Secretary to give a statement to the House on improving the existing system for them and the many single parents across the UK who are single-handedly carrying the financial and emotional burden of raising their children?
I thank the Honourable Lady for raising this, and I will happily pass on her concerns to the new Secretary of State. DWP questions are scheduled for the 17th of October, and I would encourage her to raise that issue in those questions as well.
Jim Shannon, final question.
Mr. Speaker, I declare an interest as Chair of the APPG of Pakistan Religious Minorities and also as Chair of the APPG for Freedom of Religious Belief. With that in mind, I note with concern the horrific floods and devastation and loss of life in Pakistan over the recent weeks, and I'm glad to hear of various initiatives from this government to deliver aid to help alleviate the impact of the damage on people's lives. Will the Leader of the House be able to allow a statement on the importance of this aid reaching all in need in Pakistan, particularly those who belong to other religious groups such as Christians and Ahmadis who face systematic challenges in receiving the aid that they very much need?
Well, he will know historically that the largest share of our aid budget has gone to Pakistan, and as a consequence we have a deep and well-informed relationship on how that aid money is utilised, and I know that our High Commission there will be ensuring that it is distributed both to give the maximum positive impact for everyone, but also to make sure that there is no discrimination in how it is distributed.
We now come to Business House motion. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Question is the Business House motion as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Before we start the debate, I want to put on record that I am very disappointed that the written ministerial statement, which is relevant to it, has not yet or just been made available in the last 5 minutes. Such statements should be made available whenever possible at 9:30 a.m. when they are relevant to the debate like today. It is doubly important that they are available in good time. I'm sorry this has happened, and I consider it discourteous to the House. I hope this is not the new government in the way that it intends to treat the House. I'm going to take it down as bad management or incompetence rather than deliberate.
Very generous.
Right, we now come to the general debate on UK energy costs. Before I call the Prime Minister to open the debate, I would like to point... Just a minute. I don't think that's the day today after the way this House has been treated. I'm defending you as the backbenchers. I expect a little bit more decorum at this stage. Before I call the Prime Minister to open the debate, I would like to point out the British Sign Language interpretation of the opening speech in the debate is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I now call the Prime Minister. Mr.
Speaker, I beg to move the motion. Earlier this week...
Prime Minister, just 1 second. We've started the debate. I don't want any more from that particular bench. If we do, I go and get that cup of tea early. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the motion. Earlier this week, I promised I would deal with the soaring energy prices faced by families and businesses across the UK. And today I am delivering on that promise. This government is moving immediately to introduce a new energy price guarantee that will give people certainty on energy bills. It will curb inflation and boost growth. This guarantee, which includes a temporary suspension of green levies, means that from the 1st of October, a typical household will pay no more than £2,500 per year for each of the next 2 years while we get the energy market back on track. This will save a typical household £1,000 a year. It comes in addition to the £400 energy bill support scheme. This guarantee supersedes the Ofgem price cap and has been agreed with energy retailers. We will deliver this. Mr. Speaker, I will make way in a few minutes when I have made some progress. Mr. Speaker, we will deliver this by securing the wholesale price for energy while putting in place long-term measures to secure future supplies at more affordable rates. We are supporting this country through this winter and next, and tackling the root causes of high prices so we are never in the same position again. For those using heating oil, living in park homes, or those on heat networks, we will set up a fund so that all
Prime Minister, sorry about this. Can I just say, I don't want a running commentary from here and giving me the advice. I certainly don't need it. Prime Minister, I don't want to interrupt you. It's up to you to give way when you feel it's appropriate. But just to let you know that it is now being printed, the WMS, and I'm hoping that we'll bring it into the chamber for everybody to see. Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those using heating oil, living in park homes, or those on heat networks, we will set up a fund so that all UK consumers can benefit from equivalent support. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
thank you for giving way. National Energy Action estimate with the cap at the current level there are 6.5 million households in fuel poverty. So raising the cap to £2,500, how many more millions of people will end up in fuel poverty, does you reckon?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are taking action to help people on the lowest incomes through universal credit, and we are also supplying £400 through the Energy Bills Support Scheme. Mr. Speaker, I would like to make some progress and then I will take more interventions. We will also support all businesses, charities and public sector organisations with their energy costs this winter, offering an equivalent guarantee for 6 months. After those 6 months, we will provide further support to vulnerable sectors such as hospitality, including our local pubs. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will work with business to review where this should be targeted to make sure those most in need get support. This review will be concluded within 3 months, giving businesses certainty. In the meantime, companies with the wherewithal need to be looking for ways they can improve energy efficiency and increase direct energy generation. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister giving way, and I commend her on the speed with which she and her new team really grip this challenge that's facing the country. And doesn't it demonstrate, Mr. Speaker, that Conservative governments do not stand by while millions of people on low incomes are threatened by the measures she's taken?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I recognise that people are struggling with their energy bills, and that is why I have brought forward this debate as soon as possible to give people reassurance ahead of this winter that energy bills are going to be affordable. And we will be bringing forward emergency legislation to deliver this policy. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will set out the expected costs as part of his fiscal statement later this month. And I can tell the House today that we will not be giving in to the Leader of the Opposition who calls for this to be funded through a windfall tax. That would undermine the national interest by discouraging the very investment we need to secure homegrown energy supplies. If the honourable members will allow me to make a bit more progress, I may be able to answer their questions before they've asked them. But, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite need to understand...
Prime Minister. Sorry, Prime Minister. A point of order, Kevin Brennan.
Copies have been made available to some members of the written ministerial statement, but there aren't enough for everybody. Is it possible, if I might finish this point of order, is it possible that sufficiently so that we can all see it?
As we both know, it's not a point of order, but it's certainly a clarification that they're now coming out, and we're printing them as fast as possible to make sure all members have the ability to read it. It is with great disappointment, but that's a matter of fact. Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Instead of that approach, we are taking an approach which is pro-growth, pro-business, and pro the investment we need for our country's energy security. I will give way.
Very grateful to the Prime Minister. Does she agree that we are too short of energy but have plenty of taxes? And does she agree that if we had an oversupply of taxes, as the party opposite wants, we'd have less supply of the things we were taxing?
My right honourable friend makes an extremely good point. The reality is we can't tax our way to growth. And the policy I am setting out today is all about helping people with their energy costs, as I promised, and making sure that we have the long-term energy supplies that we need for our country. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman at the back.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for giving way. Just 6 months ago,
households faced energy bills of £1,300, we are today being told that fixing prices at £2,500 is the best that the government can do. It's not. So why is the Prime Minister putting private energy profits ahead of people at this crucial time?
Well, what we are doing is we're doing the important work to help people and businesses get through this winter and next winter, whilst fixing Britain's long-term energy supplies. I've already given way a number of occasions. I will give way later. Please hold off for a bit longer. Mr. Speaker, this is the moment to be bold. We are facing a global energy crisis, and there are no cost-free options. There will be a cost to this intervention. I will give way.
I strongly welcome this package of bills to help cover. It's a marked contrast to the meagre scrappings offered by the benches opposite. Can she? I just welcome also that she's confirmed that schools and colleges will get help with their energy bills, as the colleges face increases of 300%. And could I just finally ask her, will she continue to bear down on fuel duty? Because we know that motorists at the pumps face extortionate bills when they fill up their cars.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his point, and I'm sure the Chancellor of the Exchequer is listening intently to his point ahead of his fiscal statement later this month. Mr. Speaker, I want to make some progress on explaining how we will defray the cost of this intervention, which I think might answer some of the honourable people's questions before they ask them. So the way we are going to defray the cost of this intervention is first of all by ramping up supply. Following on from the successful vaccine task force, we have created a new energy supply task force under the leadership of Maddie McTernan. They are already negotiating new long-term energy contracts with domestic and international gas suppliers to immediately bring down the cost of intervention. We are also accelerating all sources of domestic energy, including North Sea oil and gas production. We will be launching a new licensing round, which we expect to lead to over 100 new licences being awarded. And we will speed up our deployment of all clean and renewable technologies, including hydrogen, solar, carbon capture and storage, and wind, where we are already a world leader in offshore generation. Renewable and nuclear generators will move on to contracts for difference to end the situation where electricity prices are set by the marginal price of gas. This will mean that generators are receiving a fair price, reflecting their cost of production, further bringing down the cost of this intervention. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I warmly welcome the immediate action announced by the Prime Minister on the cost of energy, which is really going to help families in the Pendle constituency and right across the United Kingdom. Next week in Parliament is Nuclear Week. So will she join with me in supporting the rollout of small modular reactors championed by Rolls-Royce, who have 2 sites in my constituency? We need this technology now, so will she go further and faster to drive forward the nuclear programme in this country?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Small modular reactors are a very important part of our energy mix. They're produced here in the United Kingdom. They will help boost growth as well as boost our energy security. And secondly, I will take a few more interventions in a few minutes, but please let me make progress on my speech. Secondly, today's actions will deliver substantial benefits to our economy, boosting growth, which increases tax receipts and gives certainty to business. This intervention is expected to curb inflation by up to 5 percentage points, bringing a reduction in the cost of servicing government debt. Thirdly, I'm announcing today that with the Bank of England, we will set up a new scheme worth up to £40 billion to ensure that firms operating in the wholesale energy market have the liquidity they need to manage price volatility. This will stabilise the market and decrease the likelihood that energy retailers need our support, like they did last winter, by increasing supply, boosting the economy and increasing liquidity in the market. We will significantly reduce the cost to government of this intervention. I will get one.
Very kind of the Prime Minister to give way to so many sensible members. Today is clearly a big intervention, and the government is, as she promised, wrapping its arms around my constituents, as we did during the pandemic, and looking to the future. Can she confirm that the plans are primarily about domestic supply rather than imported reliance, and therefore in line with the commitments, the important commitments that we made at COP26 in Glasgow and the path to net zero that we made in our manifesto 3 years ago?
Well, I am completely committed to net zero by 2050, and as well as dealing with the immediate situation we face, we are also dealing with the root causes. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful for Prime Minister Way, and can I welcome her to her place and hope she will work with opposition parties in the national interest. But can she confirm that her announcement today will still see the energy bills of struggling families rising by another £500 next month, and that this winter they will be paying energy bills twice the bills that they paid last winter?
Well, we're also, at the same time as introducing the energy price guarantee, also providing families with £400 and providing extra support to the vulnerable. So vulnerable families will be receiving that extra support. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to move on to why we are in the situation we are in now. And the fact is that energy policy over the past decades has not focused enough on securing supply. There is no better. I don't know why, Mr. Speaker, I don't know why the honourable gentleman is laughing. He is partly responsible for this. There is no better example than nuclear, where the UK has not built a single new nuclear reactor in 25 years. And it's not just about supply. The regulatory structures have failed, exposing the problems of having a price cap applied to retail but not to the wholesale market. All of this has left us vulnerable to volatile global markets and malign actors in an increasingly geopolitical world. And that is why Putin is exploiting this situation by weaponising energy supplies as part of his illegal war on Ukraine. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Would she accept that with 150 years' worth of gas under the ground in GB, it is absolute madness to turn our back on that resource at a time when people are facing huge energy bills? And could she also just explain to us how she intends to deliver the support which she's talking about in Northern Ireland?
That's the people from Ireland.
Well, I do agree with the honourable gentleman. I'm coming to the point about shale gas in a minute. But I can assure him that this policy will apply in Northern Ireland, and those benefits will be open to the people of Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom. So, as well as the action that I am announcing today, we will use these 2 years ahead of us to make sure that the United Kingdom is never in this situation again. So I will be launching 2 reviews. Firstly, a review of energy regulation to fix the underlying problems. We want a new approach which will address supply and affordability for the long term. Secondly, we will conduct a review to ensure we deliver net zero by 2050 in a way that is pro-business and pro-growth. And this review will be led by my right honourable friend, the member for Kingswood. I will give way to him.
Can I firstly, on behalf of the people of South Leicestershire, welcome my right honourable friend to her role. She mentions Putin. Whilst the measures that she's announcing today are incredibly welcome for my constituents and all our constituents to protect, and particularly the poorest and most vulnerable in society, will she give an assurance today that her government will continue to stand firm against the appalling and brutal actions of Putin and his thuggish regime? And will she tell the British people honestly that we are in for a difficult winter, notwithstanding the challenges that face us?
Well, my honourable friend is right. The reason we are in this difficult situation is because of Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. But we do need to make sure that our energy supplies are more resilient and more secure, so we are never in this situation again, and we cannot be subject to global energy prices and the actions of dictators.
You would be if we listened to you.
We are delivering a stable environment that gives investors the confidence to back gas as part of our transition to net zero. It is vital that we take steps to increase our domestic energy supply. I'll make a bit more progress and then I will give way. We will end the moratorium on extracting our huge reserves of shale, which could get gas flowing as soon as 6 months, where there is local support for it. We will launch Great British Nuclear later this month, putting us on a path to deliver up to a quarter of our electricity generation with nuclear by 2050. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
To the Prime Minister. Last September, I asked the then Business Secretary why the government signed off on the closure of the Rough gas storage facility. He dismissed it as not relevant and he accused me of stoking panic and alarm. Given the government are now reportedly reopening that facility, it doesn't suggest the new Chancellor is a man of foresight and strategy, does it, Prime Minister?
We are in a very, very difficult situation, and I am committed, as Prime Minister, to doing everything it takes to resolve this situation, to help people with their energy bills, and to make sure we have security of supply for the long term. I've already taken a lot of interventions. I need to make progress on this speech. As a result of these steps on shale and on nuclear, and the acceleration of renewables, I am today setting a new ambition for our country. Far from being dependent on the global energy market and the actions of malign actors, we will make sure that the UK is a net energy exporter by 2040. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will set out a plan in the next 2 months to make sure we achieve this. Mr. Speaker, I know that businesses and families are very concerned about how they will get through this winter. That is why I felt it was important to act urgently to provide immediate help and support, as well as setting out our plan about how we are going to secure the UK's future energy supplies. This is part of my vision for rebuilding our economy. Secure energy supply is vital to growth and prosperity, yet it has been ignored for too long. I will end the UK's short-termist approach to energy security and supply once and for all. That is what I promised on the steps of Downing Street. Today, we are acting decisively on that pledge. This will help us build a stronger, more resilient and more secure United Kingdom. I commend this motion to the House.
There's a lot of members who wish to get in, so think of others after we've got through the front benches. I now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of our opening speech. We're in the middle of a national emergency. People are really scared and families don't know if they can warm their homes this winter, and businesses ask if they can keep the lights on. That is why the Labour Party spent the summer fighting for a price freeze, so that no household would pay a penny more on their bills. When we called for it, many people said we were wrong. They pretended that this crisis was something that just affected the poorest, as if working families on average wages could easily shoulder astronomical bills. They dismissed our call for support as handouts. But those objections could never last. The Prime Minister had no choice. No government can stand by while millions of families fall into poverty, whilst businesses shut their doors and the economy falls to ruin. So I am pleased there is action today, and that the principle of a price limit has been accepted. But under our plan, not a penny more on bills. Under this plan, a price rise. But this support, I'll just make some progress and then I will. But this support does not come cheap. And the real question before the House today, the real question the government faces, the political question, is who is going to pay? The Treasury estimates that energy producers could make £170 billion in unexpected windfall profits over the next 2 years. I repeat that, £170 billion in unexpected windfall profits over the next 2 years. I will give way in just a moment. The head of BP has called this crisis a cash machine for his company. And households are on the other end of that cash machine, their bills funding these eye-watering profits. That's why we've been calling for a windfall tax since January. And it's why we want to see the windfall tax expanded now. But the Prime Minister is opposed to windfall taxes. She wants to leave these vast profits on the table with one clear and obvious consequence: the bill will be picked up by working people. She claims that a windfall tax will deter investment. That's ridiculous. These vast profits are not the reward of careful planning. They are the unexpected windfall from Putin's barbarity in Ukraine. There is no reason why taxing them would affect investment in the future. Don't just take my word for it. Asked which investment BP would cancel if there was a windfall tax, the chief executive said none. None. His words, not mine. So the Prime Minister's only argument against the windfall tax falls apart at first inspection, laying bare that she's simply driven by dogma, and it's working people that will pay for that dogma. I will give way.
Does he accept that this government has already introduced a windfall tax, and energy companies today are paying 65% on their profits? What would he rather see that tax set at?
We're happy until it's 100%. He wants 100%.
We're talking about what happens this winter and next. And if he doesn't understand, I'll tell him so. Every pound the Prime Minister's government refuses to raise in windfall taxes, which is leaving billions on the table, is an extra pound of borrowing. That's the simple, straightforward argument. Every pound she leaves on the table is an extra pound of borrowing, loading the burden of the cost of living crisis onto working people who will have to pay back for years to come.
Will my right honourable friend?
I will.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. The Prime Minister has been careful to frame her guarantee in terms of her refusal to tax. But is she not going to have a problem explaining to the British people how a levy on their bills in the future to repay the borrowing is not actually a tax.
I'm grateful for that intervention. This is the basic political divide. They want to protect the excess profits of the oil and gas and energy, the excess profits. We want to protect working people. Mr. Speaker, I will give way.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way, and this Saturday myself and many members of the Chesterfield Labour Party will be out meeting voters in Chesterfield, and if any of them haven't been paying attention this week, they might still say you're all the same. But isn't it absolutely clear now that there is a clear divide? Yes. Every voter that I knock on the door, they will know political parties have a choice. They've chosen to be on the side of the energy generators. We've chosen to be on the side of bill payers.
Well, I'm grateful for that, and I'll be absolutely amazed if members opposite haven't picked this up. Ask voters whether they think that it's fair that they pick up the bill, or those companies that made profits they didn't expect to make, and there's only one answer to that question. It's a very simple question of whose side are you on? And I'm afraid this isn't a one-off, because not only is the Prime Minister refusing to extend the windfall tax, she is also choosing to cut corporation tax, an extra £17 billion in tax cuts for companies that are already doing well. That means handing a tax cut to the water companies polluting our beaches, handing tax cuts to the banks, handing a tax cut to Amazon. She's making that choice, even though households and public services need every penny they can get. Working people are paying for the cost of living crisis. Stroke victims wait an hour for an ambulance, and criminals walk the streets with impunity. It's the wrong choice for working people. It's the wrong choice for Britain. I will give way.
I thank my right honourable friend, and it seems that the government has decided to deal with this energy crisis off the backs of ordinary, hard-working Brits and load huge levels of debt on future generations rather than properly taxing the billions of pounds of excess profits for energy companies. Why is this government on the side of big corporates rather than being on the side of ordinary, hard-working Brits? Is it because the Prime Minister is a former employee of Shell and is therefore on the side of oil and gas companies and is not protecting ordinary working British people?
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention, and it does come down to this basic point. Everybody in this House recognises that profits are needed for investment in all businesses. But in this case, these are unexpected profits that were not expected to make. And when the Chief Executive of BP says this will not deter any investment, it's a bit rich for the opposite to say he's completely wrong. He is the Chief Executive of BP. He's made his case. It's the complete opposite of the case that the Prime Minister is trying to make. Now, Mr. Speaker, the immediate cause of, I will in a moment, the immediate cause of this energy crisis is Putin's grotesque invasion of Ukraine. We stand united in our support for Ukraine. If we're to defend democracy, defeat imperialism, and preserve security on the continent, Putin's aggression must fail. And whatever our political differences, the Prime Minister will always have my full support in that common endeavour. But we must ask ourselves, why are we so exposed to changes in the international price of oil and gas? Why are we so at the mercy of dictators, able to pull the plug on wells and shut down pipelines? Why is there such a fundamental flaw in our national security? I will give way in just a moment. I'll make my argument, then I will give way. It's about a failure to prepare, a failure to increase our energy independence, a failure to rapidly decrease our reliance on fossil fuels. They banned, Mr. Speaker, they banned onshore wind in 2015. That cost us clean energy capacity equivalent to all our Russian gas imports in recent years. A policy disaster. The Prime Minister has been constantly opposed to solar power, the cheapest form of energy that we have, and she's been consistently wrong. And it's not just what the Prime Minister said in the heat of her leadership campaign this summer. when she was Environment Secretary, the government slashed solar subsidies. The market crashed. I will give way.
To the right honourable gentleman, but the Leader of the Opposition is being completely misleading, if I may say so, because what he said, it's under this government that the United Kingdom has the second highest offshore wind generation capacity anywhere in the world. And how is that created? It's through investment by companies. This government will allow for that to happen.
Well, I take it from that intervention that he doesn't quarrel with me that the ban on onshore wind since 2015 has been a policy disaster, along with the opposition to solar power. Forgive me, I saw the former Prime Minister raising it. I will take her intervention, of course.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He's talking about lack of preparation for energy security for the United Kingdom. In that case, if Labour is so worried about lack of preparation, why did they not build any new nuclear capacity?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for that intervention. Let me deal with it in full, because it's a very important point, because nuclear is vital to our future, and a new generation of power plants should have been built by now. Yesterday, the Prime Minister tried desperately to blame Labour, and that intervention goes to this point. I remember the exchange across this dispatch box in 2006, in which Prime Minister Blair said, "I'm pro-nuclear." And the Leader of the Opposition, David Cameron, didn't know where to look. If you haven't seen the clip, have a look. I'm pro-nuclear. David Cameron didn't know where to look. The uncomfortable truth for members opposite is this. The last Labour government gave the go-ahead for new nuclear sites in 2009. In the 13 long years since then, not one has been completed. Let me turn to home insulation, which I will give way.
To the right honourable gentleman. Tony Blair may have said he was pro-nuclear, but he didn't actually build any nuclear power stations. Let me ask him about the windfall tax. The £170 billion he talks about, from my understanding, most of that is not profits of UK companies. It's energy supplied to the United Kingdom, but it's not within our ability to tax it. And secondly, we already have a windfall tax. We're already taxing those profits at 65%. How high does he want a windfall tax to go?
On the question of 2006, I think I'll give way to him again. What was his party's position in 2006 when David Cameron was asked the question on nuclear? Because he didn't have a position on it. But on the £170 billion that he raises, I think he's wrong about that. But if there is any doubt, I'd invite the Treasury to disclose the documents about this so that we can all see them and evaluate them. Because I think I'm right and I think he's wrong. But if the documents could be made available, we can all look at that £170 billion. Mr. Speaker, I will give way.
But isn't the bigger point that there's a simple choice about how you pay for it? It either all goes on borrowing and ordinary families and on the never-never for this country, or at least some of it is charged in a windfall tax on unearned and unexpected income, which Putin has basically put into the pockets of Shell and BP. That's the fundamental choice, isn't it?
That is the fundamental choice. It's the fundamental divide in this House. Let them defend their position to protect those excess profits, and we will defend our position of standing up for working people. I'm going to make some progress. Mr. Speaker, I've taken a lot of intervention. I'm going to make some progress. Let me turn to home insulation, which reduces energy consumption like nothing else. We have the draftiest homes in Europe. The last Labour government set about fixing that. Then the party opposite said, cut the green crap, and the whole project all but collapsed. Installation rates down by 92%. Utterly short-sighted. And it's costing millions of households £1,000 a year on their energy bills right now. The Prime Minister is right to recognise that immediate support needs to be combined with longer-term action. But I'm afraid fracking and a dash for gas in the North Sea will not cut bills, nor strengthen our energy security, but they will drive a coach and horses through our efforts to fight the looming climate crisis. She should listen to her own Chancellor sitting next to her. What did the Chancellor have to say about this just a few months ago? Now, this is quite a long quote. See the Chancellor leaning forward. I've tried to cut it down. But every sentence is worth repeating of what the Chancellor said just a few months ago, his words. For those calling for its return, they misunderstand the situation we find ourselves in. If we lifted the fracking moratorium, it would take up to a decade to extract sufficient volumes. And it would come at a high price for communities and our precious countryside, his words. I'll go on because this is so good. Second, he said just a few months ago, no amount of shale gas from hundreds of wells dotted across rural England would be enough to lower the European price any time soon. And he went on. And with the best will in the world, private companies are not going to sell shale gas they produce to UK consumers below the market price. They are not charities. Spot on, Chancellor. And what did the Chancellor at the same time have to say about North Sea gas? Additional North Sea production won't materially affect the wholesale price. Indeed, earlier this year, his previous department helpfully put out a series of Mythbusters, a government myth-busting document. Here's one of them. Chancellor, your document. Myth. Extracting more North Sea gas lowers prices. Answer. Fact. UK production isn't large enough to materially impact on the global price of gas. I've got a copy for the Prime Minister. We do need to carefully manage our existing resources in the North Sea. And the industry has an important role to play in our future as we transition to a different form of energy. But doubling down on fossil fuels is a ludicrous answer to a fossil fuel crisis. And if all countries took the approach advocated by her new Energy Secretary of squeezing every single drop out of their fossil fuel reserves, global temperatures will rise by a catastrophic 3 degrees. That will be devastating for our planet and future generations. And it's totally unnecessary. Now, I'm going to make some progress because I do think other speakers need to get in. New wind and solar power are now 9 times cheaper than gas. 9 times cheaper. So we need a clean energy sprint, urgently accelerating the rollout of offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, nuclear, hydrogen and tidal. And last year, I set out a new national mission to insulate 19 million homes and cut bills for good. If the government had taken me up on that challenge, 2 million homes would already be insulated this winter. Britain needs a fresh start. We need a government that will never leave working people to pick up the tab for excess profits of the energy industry. We need a government that plans for the long term, rather than leaving us badly exposed to the whims of dictators. And we need a government that will drive us forward to energy independence, rather than doubling down on fossil fuels. The change we need is not the 4th Tory Prime Minister in 6 years, it's a Labour government. Thank you.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I refer the House to my entry in the Members' Register. Can I first of all congratulate my right honourable friend on acting so swiftly to bring forward a package of support for people with their energy bills. There's no doubt, as every member of this House knows, that this is a matter of real concern for people in my constituency and every other constituency who've been concerned about how they're going to heat their homes, and indeed businesses worried about how they can continue to run their businesses. May I also welcome the fact that my right honourable friend has coupled action on energy bills with action on energy security. The vicious further invasion of Ukraine by Russia has indeed shown the necessity of us having our own energy security, although it makes sense anyway. We have made important progress in this over recent years. I refer, of course, to the investment in Hinkley Point C, and I again welcome the commitment that my right honourable friend and the government have made to continuing that commitment to support nuclear energy. And as I pointed out in my intervention, just wait a second. Well, perhaps more than 1 second, but anyway. As I pointed out in my intervention to the Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition, and was emphasised by the excellent intervention by my Right Honourable friend, the Member for Forest of Dean, in 13 years of government, whatever the then Leader of the Labour Party might have said, they did not build any new capability. I will give way to
I thank her for giving way. On Hinkley Point C, it's going to be at least 4 years late, possibly 5 years late. It's nearly 50% over budget, and EDF have got an eye-watering 35-year contract for a strike rate at £92.50 per megawatt, compared to roughly £40 per megawatt for just 15 years in onshore and offshore wind. She should have scrapped Hinkley Point C when she had the chance, shouldn't she?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that it's high time that Scottish nationalists actually came up with some practical solutions to these issues, rather than rejecting everything that the government says. I give forward.
I'm very grateful to the former Prime Minister. You know, we're all trying to find energy security. Can I say to her and say to the government front bench, what we should be doing is prioritising tidal. There's an excellent Royal Society report from last year that indicates we can get to 11.5 gigawatts. I'm asking the government to enhance the ring-fence pot from 20 to 50 million. You'll get the baseload you need, and you won't need nuclear energy.
Say to the right honourable gentleman, this is actually a rather strange point in my political career, because I actually agree with him about the importance of tidal. And can I also say to him that when I was Prime Minister, I looked very closely, over a significant period of time, at proposals, particularly for the Severn Estuary, and unfortunately, at that time, the price that would have had to have been guaranteed in relation to the cost to the consumer was too high. Of course, looking at it today, it could be a very different picture. Now, my right honourable friend outlined a number of steps that the government is taking, and I look forward to seeing the full details of these. But I would like to suggest there are some other measures which will address energy prices and energy security, while capitalising on our high-growth tech sectors, and would also help us to meet our domestic and international climate change obligations. Because there are measures that will save people money that will also help to save the planet. The UK has already shown that you don't have to choose between low emissions and economic growth. You can have both. To achieve net zero, we will need to remove the country's dependence on fossil fuels. My right honourable friend announced a net zero review. Perhaps when he sums up this debate, the Secretary of State could indicate how that net zero review will fit in with the net zero strategy which the government published in advance of COP26 and which many are already working on. So while my right honourable friend has acted swiftly and correctly to help people over these difficult times, it does make sense to accelerate our transition to a low-carbon energy system. And that can be done by, in just a moment, that can be done by speeding up the rollout of low-cost, homegrown, renewable technologies.
Former Prime Minister, she said the government's acted correctly, but the government's case is that energy prices are going up because of the war in Ukraine. Therefore, these profits are being earned because of the war in Ukraine. Why is it right to prioritise war profiteering and instead have a stealth tax on households?
What is right is to provide support for households who are worried about their energy bills. That's exactly what the government is doing. Of course, if we are going to increase our use of renewables, and it is important that the price that people are paying for their electricity reflects the cost of that production and not the cost of gas. And I welcome again the fact that my right honourable friend, no, I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to make some progress on it. Can I say to my right honourable friend that I'm pleased that she's actually indicated that she's going to take action in relation to that particular matter. Can I also say that getting full benefit from this does mean upgrading the UK's power grid infrastructure. Alongside this, we do need to improve the energy efficiency of homes. And this would not just reduce demand for energy, saving people money, but again, it's an element that will help to save the planet. We do need to consider rolling out a significant home insulation programme. There is also... I will give way to my honourable friend and then I'll give way to them.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Her government did indeed look very closely at the prospect of a tidal lagoon off Swansea Bay. And at that time, it is quite correct, as she says, that it was too expensive, although the price now looks relatively attractive. But does she agree with me that actually the real opportunity at the moment, which the current Chancellor has been very supportive of when he was at Bayes, is for marine energy to come from tidal stream, which the new renewable auction is supporting, but there is much more that can be done, especially if we can affect the planning regulations around the pipeline of opportunity. Does she agree that there is more this government could do on that?
Yes, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I welcome every opportunity to actually increase the diversity of our supply of energy, and looking at these new opportunities is absolutely a way to do that as well. I said I would give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Very grateful, and of course I completely support the tidal lagoon in Swansea, and I hope that that is now a real possibility for us. I hope the Prime Minister would accept that. But I just want to, and I agree with her about insulation. I think I understood the Prime Minister to say earlier that there was going to be protection for public services for just 6 months. Many local authorities, hospitals, schools are facing dramatically increased bills already. Aren't they going to need more support than just 6 months?
Say that I think the public sector will be very pleased to hear that the government has taken their concerns on board and is providing support for them. Can I also say, as another step that I think the government needs to take, it should look at regulations, building regulations. We are still building homes with gas boilers. Doesn't it make sense to actually change the regulations? Because those homes will have to be retrofitted in just a very few years' time. And surely it is more cost effective to take action now.
On that very point, would you give way
I'm very... Before, the Honourable Gentleman had one intervention. What I'm bothered about is a lot of people want to get it. I don't want to stifle the debate, but I want to make sure everybody gets a voice.
Yes, I apologise, Mr. Speaker, for being generous in interventions. The government is also key to driving greater private sector investment in low-carbon solutions. For instance, by we've already heard about some early-stage technologies and emerging sectors such as hydrogen production. Greater investor certainty cuts the cost of new technology, drives innovation, creates jobs and boosts economic growth. And the government's unequivocal support for this agenda would be a positive signal not just for our green tech industry, but for the ambition of the UK economy more broadly. Now, no, I'm just about to finish, so. People need help with their bills today. That is what the government is providing. But Britain led the world through the Industrial Revolution. If we grasp the opportunity now, we can lead the world in a cleaner, greener form of growth.
Hear, hear. We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say it's a pleasure to follow the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead. And if I can just reflect back very briefly on the way that she behaved when she was Prime Minister, and I have to say the courtesy that she showed to opposition leaders, whether it was the then leader of the Labour Party or ourselves as a third party. And if I can gently say to the Prime Minister that some of the protocols of making sure that we had advance sight of statements is important, and indeed that we're aware of when the Prime Minister would be coming to the Chamber to speak. I don't know if she's listening to any of that, but it would be helpful if that could be passed on. Mr. Speaker, at the start of the year, we were faced with an energy crisis. By the summer, it was an emergency. Right now, today, we're at the precipice of a humanitarian disaster. Because it's no longer a question of whether to heat or eat, when many households can no longer afford to do either.
Would the honourable gentleman give
this, let me make some progress on it, and I will. This cost crisis puts livelihoods and lives at risk. And all the while, as this disaster deepened, all summer, the Tories spent all their time desperately fighting amongst themselves, and the public were left desperately waiting for a real cost of living plan. We finally have a plan today, but I fear that when the public absorb the details, it will fall far short of what help they need. Now, we've heard today that the green levies are being scrapped, and that is something that is of deep concern to those of us on these benches, particularly given that the green levies fund the warm discount scheme and, of course, energy efficiency measures for low-income households. And I want to ask the Government to make sure that that support will remain in place for those that need it. But, Mr Speaker, the sheer scale of those soaring energy bills meant that there was never any question that households and businesses couldn't be able to pay the cost of energy bills. They were and they are unaffordable. If these prices weren't frozen, the bills simply couldn't have been paid. So, freezing prices wasn't really a choice. It's the only political option. And when the current price cap stands at £2,000 with a 54% increase since spring, and many people are already unable to pay, setting the cap at £2,500 isn't an actual freeze. We know too that businesses, especially SMEs, are facing even sharper cost increases than households, and an avalanche of insolvencies and redundancies is forecast. Many businesses simply could not have afforded to stay open. I will get to it.
Mr Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Reed's Bakery in my constituency, which supplies biscuits to the four corners of the world, is in danger of going bust by Christmas. So can I appeal to the Government, in a spirit of inclusivity, to please look at the letter I've been sent by Reed's Bakery and to see what could be tailored to help a vital business in a remote part of the UK.
I agree with my honourable friend, my neighbouring MP, and indeed over the course of the last few weeks I've visited businesses in Ayrshire with my honourable friend, the member for Kilmarnock, and visited another bakery, Brownings, and in fact met with the industry body. And it's clear that bakers in particular are facing real struggles with the rise of energy and other costs. And it's critical that the Government gives the details of what they're intending to support business. I'll take one more intervention, then I'll...
Grateful to the right honourable gentleman. On the question of the cap, the Prime Minister indicated that one of our reviews is going to be on regulation. Does the right honourable gentleman think it's time to take a serious look at the operations of Ofgem, and for a regulator, how much support they're giving to consumers, whether it's domestic consumers or businesses?
I think it's fair to say that the current regime is not fit for purpose, and it's why we're in the situation that we are today. So an urgent review of that is absolutely required. Mr Speaker, let me make some progress. Good businesses, profitable businesses, seeing a tsunami of cost increases with energy costs at the core of these, quite simply are facing a fight for survival. It is clear that today's plan does not go nearly far enough to mitigate the expected cost increase facing employers, and the UK Government needs to grasp the scale of this emergency.
I wish to say something about the announcement which has just been made about Her Majesty. I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment. I'm going to take no more, just to, if there is anything else, we will update the House accordingly. Thank you. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure on behalf of all colleagues that we're saddened to hear the announcement that's been made, and the thoughts and prayers of all of us will be with Her Majesty the Queen and indeed with the royal family. Mr Speaker, in reality, the one big political question, the real question, was how today's plan would be paid for and who would pay for it. And ever since the new Prime Minister took office, we've been waiting for these answers. But after all the waiting, it couldn't be any clearer. She set it out very brazenly. The Prime Minister's plan means that the public pays. She has made the political choice to tax families instead of companies, to put profit over people. Instead of a windfall tax, she's chosen a new Tory tax, the Truss tax. The Truss tax that means that in the months and years ahead, households and businesses will be punished with higher bills, higher interest rates and higher mortgage costs. A Truss tax means it cuts to the vital public services people rely on and which are used to support the most vulnerable. A Truss tax means a threat to the Scottish budget, which the Scottish Government is using to protect our population and shield workers and public services as best they can.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. He seems to be making an argument for a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies. And given that the Leader of the Opposition wasn't able to answer this question, they already pay 65% on their profits. What would he rather see that tax set at?
I'm grateful for that intervention, and if he just bears with me, I'm going to come to that very specific point. But that issue of who pays is important, because there is no... Well, actually, I will do, and you might actually show some respect if you don't mind. Because at the end of the day, oil and gas producers are making windfall profits. Our constituents, his constituents, are suffering. And it's right, Mr. Speaker, that we look at the contribution that those making windfall profits will make. And I will come to that. I'm going to make a little bit of progress, because I'm conscious that others want to get in. Mr. Speaker, the frightening bit for people is that the new Prime Minister made this choice on day one in the job. Yep. Because on day one, we saw the pound slip to a low not seen since the Thatcher years, knocked by the UK's worsening economic outlook. On day one, our first major decision as Prime Minister will see big business profits prioritised over family budgets. And on day one, we can already predict that the Truss tax paid for by households for the years to come will be the Prime Minister's enduring legacy, eating away at household budgets long after she and her party have been voted out of office. If day one was that bad, you couldn't blame people for feeling that the worst is yet to come. Mr. Speaker, the decision not to bring in an additional windfall tax is the biggest and the worst political choice in this plan. Because let's look at Shell and BP as an example. Now, I want corporates to be able to be profitable to invest, to create jobs and to finance a green transition. But there is a difference between a fair profit and an excess windfall or excess profit. Mr. Speaker, Shell's first half profits were up by 177% to $25.2 billion. Shell were making excess profits to such an extent they brought back shares worth $8.5 billion and declared that they would buy back a further $6 billion worth of shares between July and September. If you want the example of where the excess profit is, Mr. Speaker, then there it is. Yep. In total, this means that $14.5 billion of excess profits not being invested in green energy projects, money that's been generated from high energy prices, that our constituents and our businesses have to pay. That is the reality. Indeed. Then let's take a look at British Petroleum. Q2 profits up from $3.1 billion to $9.2, and a share buyback for this quarter of $3.5 billion. Yep. You know, Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, that will disgust our constituents, that money has been given back to shareholders at a time that people quite simply can't afford to put their heating on. Here. These are global corporates, but we can and should fairly tax their UK activities. So why on earth is the Prime Minister failing to bring in a fair windfall tax? Why are ordinary people right across these islands ultimately going to have to foot these bills? Why does her plan not address that real issue? Mr. Speaker, this energy plan is not only defined by the choice it makes to make the public pay instead of the excess profits of massive corporations. It is also defined by its glaring omissions, because there is no proper plan to help those that are already struggling. Support needs to be targeted to low-income households and those negatively impacted by spiralling costs, such as unpaid carers, larger households and disabled people. In Scotland, we are already prioritising this support to the most vulnerable. The Scottish Government is doing what it can, freezing rents, banning evictions, freezing train fares, expanding free school meals to primary 6 and primary 7. That's a government acting with compassion.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for making the most valid point, that the working people across these islands will be paying for generations to come for this borrowing, for excess greed, described by the UN Secretary-General as utterly grotesque and immoral, to be making excess profits on the back of fossil fuels. And what I've heard from this government today is more of the same. The question I want to ask is, has the government put any conditions, despite their ideology that profits must be made regardless, have they put any conditions on these excess profits on what they're going to do in investment to a rapid transition so it saves all our future generations from the climate catastrophe?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. And, you know, in the context of this, we're doing what we can with the devolved powers that we have. And let me say to the government that one of the things that we have done is introduce the game-changing Scottish Child Payment, which will be increased to £25 a week, lifting 50,000 children in poverty out of poverty in Scotland. But I need to make progress. But we're all too aware that this is nowhere near enough to mitigate the effects of this crisis, because most of the key economic levers lie here at Westminster. So, if the new Prime Minister is serious about helping everyone through this winter, she should at the very least lift universal credit by £25 a week.
We'll take it away.
Whilst I welcome the remarks of the Prime Minister on those on off-grid, we must be given clarity over support for those across swathes of rural Scotland who are reliant on oil heating and who are not subject to the price cap. Clarity is also needed to those who have accepted fixed-term contracts at a higher rate in a bid to weather the storm. They must be allowed to switch to benefit from the support that's been put in place. And crucially, vital support for the most vulnerable must go hand in hand with the UK Government to increase budgets of the devolved administrations or grant them greater powers to borrow so that they can do more to help all public service workers and the most vulnerable. I will give way to...
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman who's making a very broad and apposite speech. He was challenged on the rate of tax that he believed was appropriate, but of course he will also know that prior to the introduction of the windfall tax, the UK had the lowest tax rate of any oil and gas producer in the world. 65%, which is what he was challenged on, is actually 6 percentage points below the average of all producers in the world. So even if you were prepared to go to the global average, it would still mean that relief could be given to taxpayers in this country.
I have to say that the honourable gentleman makes an awful lot of sense with his intervention. And what we should be reflecting on is that these are oil and gas companies that are making additional profits, not because they're improving their businesses, not because they're investing, but quite simply because the oil and gas prices are higher. And it's quite right in the context of that our consumers, our businesses are compensated. Why on earth are we sitting back allowing the oil and gas companies to engage in billions and billions of dollars of share buybacks? Mr. Speaker, I want to make progress because I'm conscious of the time and those that want to speak. I want to briefly deal with another prominent point in the Prime Minister's speech, because the Prime Minister blames the cost of living crisis on the war in Ukraine, and I believe that this issue is worth expanding on. And of course, there is no doubting that what has happened in Ukraine has had a major role in spiralling wholesale prices. And we have rightly come together across this chamber in condemnation of Putin's horrific war and his actions to thwart European energy supply. And I look forward to continuing to work with the new government in a spirit of consensus on this issue. We all stand together against Putin's horrible actions, the war in Ukraine. But as we've rightly helped Ukraine, we must also help citizens at home. Indeed, we owe it to them to do so. And I would hope that the Prime Minister will reach consensus with me on this point. But where we divide is what I believe we must recognise that other countries in Europe, far more reliant on Russian gas than the UK, have weathered the economic storm far better than the United Kingdom. And we must therefore recognise the UK government's role in creating the circumstances for this crisis.
We'll take it away.
Shameful mismanagement by a successive Tory government stopped by a Tory Brexit means that the UK has the highest inflation in the G7, the lowest growth in the G20, and we're marching headlong into a recession. UK household electricity prices have surged ahead of European peers, and the UK is now in a deeper state of crisis than most because of the damaging choices that have been made.
We don't need it.
Scotland doesn't need it. It's actually...
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. Does he share my view that for my constituents in North Ayrshire and Arran, the most important aspect of this announcement today is that as they were waiting to hear of help with their fuel bills, as they live in difficulty, what they've been told today is that their fuel bills will rise and they will be bitterly disappointed by this, and nothing has been offered to them today. Does he agree with that disappointment?
Yes, I do. And of course we need to reflect that these energy bills in Scotland are rising in an energy-rich Scotland. And the damage of the choices that the UK government has made, choices that have been imposed upon us, make the choice of Scotland's future ever clearer.
We'll take it away.
Because Scotland is energy rich, we simply shouldn't be facing an emergency. Mr Deputy Speaker, it may surprise some in this House, but Scotland produces 6 times more gas than we consume, and almost 100% of our entire electricity production comes from renewables. That's not attention-seeking, Prime Minister. These are the facts. Scotland has the energy. We just simply don't have the powers. We are stuck in a UK market that prices our electricity based on the price of wholesale gas, and the power to change the system lies with Westminster.
I thank him for giving way. And of course he'll also know that although we are producing almost 100% of our energy from renewable sources, the grid connection charges that are £7.36 per megawatt hour compared to 40 pence per megawatt hour in England doesn't help further investment.
Incredible.
We need these grid connection charges to be reduced, because my constituents want to know, when they can see windmill or wind turbines outside their windows, why are their prices going up?
Well, again, my honourable friend makes a very, very important point. We're being ripped off on Scotland's ability to deliver green renewable energy. But it's even worse than that, because for those of us that live in the north of Scotland, because we have a regional distribution market, we pay a premium for the electricity that was sent south. We then have to pay the highest prices to get it back. That's the cost to people in Scotland of Westminster's control of our energy market. So what is needed, most crucial of all, and what is glaringly lacking in this energy plan, is fundamental overhaul of the energy market to break the link between cost of gas and the price of renewable and low-carbon electricity. The reality, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that an independent and an energy-rich Scotland, with the normal powers to act on our own interests, could have cushioned our economy from this cost-of-living crisis. Through independence, Scotland could use our energy well for the benefit of our people. So for households and businesses in Scotland, the cost of living crisis is literally the cost of living with Westminster. It is a cost we can no longer afford, and it is a price we are no longer willing to pay. It's why Scotland's people will choose independence.
There's a lot of interest in this debate, so therefore we're introducing forthwith a 3-minute time limit. Robin Walker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister and indeed all her colleagues to their places on the front bench and the rapid action that has been announced today. I wanted to see action for consumers in my constituency, but also for businesses, for charities and the public sector, and I'm delighted to hear all of that included in today's statement. Over the summer, I've heard from hundreds of constituents about their concerns, people who are vulnerable, elderly, students and people with illnesses and disabilities, which mean that they weren't able to turn down their heating in the upcoming winter. So the action which has been announced today will be extremely welcome in all of those quarters. The fact that there is a 2-year cap in place, particularly welcome in my constituency. But I've also been hearing from businesses And I've been very, very concerned at some of the costs facing pubs, hospitality businesses, manufacturers in my constituency. Indeed, as long ago as last year, I was writing to the then Business Secretary, now Chancellor, about high-energy manufacturers such as aluminium extrusions businesses, Superform and Aeromet in my constituency, and about some of our largest manufacturers, Worcester Bosch and Mazak, and the impact of energy costs on them. So I'm delighted that today's announcement also means help for businesses with energy. And of course, that help for businesses with energy is also, in the long term, help for consumers. I look forward to hearing more about the urgent work going on to support the hospitality sector, which is so important in all of our constituencies. And even retailers have been affected by these issues. I was hearing from a wonderful independent retailer in Worcester, Toys and Games of Worcester, that their energy bills were going up by as much as 400% they expected later on this year. I hope that this intervention today will mean that that no longer happens and that business can continue to thrive. I'm delighted as a former schools minister to hear of the help for schools. I know some of the challenges that they face with energy pressures, and I think it's vital that we help them to address those. I do think the intervention on that front is vital and important, and of course for charities as well. In the last week I visited my wonderful hospice in Worcester St Richard's, and this week I'll be visiting the Children's Hospice. I know both of them were concerned about the impact of energy bills, so we've seen correct interventions in all of those spaces. There's much to welcome in this statement. The new Energy Supply Task Force, the speeding up of deployment of clean technologies, including, crucially, hydrogen, the reduction in inflation by up to 5 percentage points, and the new Bank of England scheme to support liquidity in the wholesale market. A review to ensure net zero can be met in a way that supports business and is pro-growth, which I'm delighted to hear is taking place under my honourable friend and sometime lookalike for Kingswood. So I welcome this statement. I want to make sure that we go further, and particularly I would urge ministers to consider the opportunities of hydrogen in helping us to make sure we can continue to deliver gas central heating to our constituents' home in a clean, low-cost and energy-efficient way.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Although the solutions to this crisis may sound complicated in this debate, the choice is straightforward for the government. Who pays at the end of the day? And let's be clear what a windfall tax is. It's not taxing the profits of energy companies that they had planned for and that could be expected in all reason. This is a windfall that has come about, as the government has said itself, as a consequence of what is happening in the Ukraine, the aggression by Putin. And the question that I have and that my constituents will have is, how can the government reasonably come to a conclusion that it is okay for those energy companies to make these huge profits on the back of that aggression by Putin? And this is not as if it's a windfall for the government. This is going to cost the taxpayer through the government, no matter what we do over the windfall tax. And the government is under pressure in other areas of expenditure. We only have to look at the newspapers today about yet again, the numbers of people waiting for operations in the NHS has gone up again to 6.8 million people waiting. We can see in the papers today about the teachers' assistants in schools, where they are being forced, because of the cost of living, to question whether they can stay committed to supporting children in the schools and move to higher paid jobs in places like supermarkets. Everything, where you look, the government is under pressure of a public expenditure on our vital public services. Yet when it comes to this, they're prepared to just wave aside the potential to pay for these increases. I'll give way briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful that he mentions the case of teaching assistants, because I actually had a teaching assistant contact me recently, and there are many, many low-paid workers and many others on moderate incomes who will be staggered by the government's decision today to put the interests of energy companies ahead of normal families.
Absolutely. My honourable friend is absolutely right. And so the government is morally wrong to turn its back on this windfall tax when it clearly is under financial pressure in other areas of public expenditure. But I wanted to raise just one specific issue relating to my constituency and this brief contribution I can make to this debate. And I have a craft bakery that has survived for 100 years. It's about to celebrate its centenary. It's been run by 6 generations of the same family. It kept feeding people in my constituency. I wasn't the MP at the time, but during the Second World War. So even the Luftwaffe couldn't shut down this bakery. It employs 20 members of staff, and now it's trying to renegotiate in an industry that is really heavy in the use of energy. It is trying to renegotiate its energy contracts, and it is facing increases in those contracts of 300–400%, and it's negotiated them now. And in the statement that we've had published, and that's it, by the way, that's the sheer length of this statement in this important crisis. That's the amount of the government's statement today, with 200 words. They are facing negotiations now, but this statement says that there will be assistance equivalent to that given to individuals for businesses guaranteed for 6 months. And the Prime Minister, I wrote the words down, said that businesses would be given some idea of what assistance they will get in 3 months. Well, they're negotiating now. I mean, we got no clarity from the Prime Minister in her statement. It was like she was making a Queen's speech, my government will. But she gave us no detail on actually what these government ministers will be doing. And one of the things I want to guarantee on is if we're going to get a financial statement from the government next week, or towards the end of this session before we break again for conferences, will there be a proper debate in here on that financial statement as we're required to have? Or will the government avoid scrutiny yet again? Because that's been a repeated action by the government.
Mel Stride. Deputy Speaker, and I rise to broadly welcome these measures. We know that we live in terribly difficult times. Yesterday, the Treasury Committee took evidence from the Governor of the Bank of England and other members of the MPC, and the point was made that the impact of these energy rises on households is about 4 times that which occurred in the 1970s. These are truly frightening times, and so I'm very pleased that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has come forward with such a bold package of measures, both for consumers but also critically for businesses over the next 6 months with a review after 3. I was pleased to see the Bank of England facility, the liquidity facility for energy businesses totalling 40 billion, which I think would be very important in terms of the functioning of the marketplace, and also this critical commitment to review the way in which the pricing of our electricity is determined, whether it be in relation to gas or the actual underlying costs of alternative means of energy production. I did want to focus briefly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on the macroeconomic issues here, which are easy to overlook. This is a huge intervention. The Prime Minister detailed that the Chancellor would come forward with those costings at the emergency fiscal event that he is to present to the House soon. Now, that in terms including, or alongside, should I say, the tax reductions that have been mooted, plus the other pressures on the public finances, mean that debt is most certainly going to increase, as is the deficit. And whilst it has been stated that inflation will be assisted by these measures, which is true, inflation, of course, is just a measure of price rises relative to a previous period at a particular point in time. And whilst it may be the case that the downward pressure on the CPI from these freezes will be positive, it will be a stimulus to the economy, and through time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, inflation may actually net increase. Now, that will require a response from our central bank, which may see interest rates in the more medium term increasing with increased servicing costs for our debt. So I think we need to see this very much in the round, and this is where I think this debate around the windfall tax actually should be at least considered, and the Treasury Committee will be looking at that in some detail. The final point I wish to make in my remaining 30 seconds is I think it's critical that when it comes to the emergency fiscal event, we do have an OBR independent forecast to take into account all of these issues, the great uncertainty that we're talking about, the huge fiscal interventions which have yet, the costings have not been presented to us. We need to see what the impact of that is going to be on the public finances in order to reassure the markets. Thank you.
Thank you. Caroline Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Everyone will be affected by the rise in energy prices, all looking for ways to cut back by being more careful about the appliance we use or opting for alternative ways to keep warm and prepare meals. It's a worrying time for many of my constituents in Swansea East, and for the others the length and breadth of the country. But for some, the worry and the fear are even greater. Over 60,000 people across the UK are in need of renal replacement therapy in the form of dialysis or a transplant, as is my daughter-in-law Hayley is one of those. Hayley suffers from kidney failure and has done since she was 11. A transplant at 15 gave her 7 years of freedom, but for the last 11 years she's been back on dialysis. Home dialysis allows Hayley to spend more time with her family and has even given her the opportunity to attend university and to go to work rather than spending 3 days a week in hospital. But running the machine for 10 days, 10 hours at a time, 6 nights a week comes at a price. The approximate cost for electricity to run the home dialysis machine is almost £80 per month at present, and with energy prices set to soar, these costs are only going to increase, threatening many patients' ability to continue their life-saving treatment at home. Charity Kidney Care UK and the Popham Kidney Support in my constituency have both recently contacted me about their concerns for patients and network. But with the cost of extra energy needed for home dialysis machines expected to increase to £2,000 a year, the level of financial support will fall far short. And the situation is even worse in other parts of the country where reimbursement amounts vary considerably, with some patients receiving no help at all. The cost of kidney failure and other chronic conditions should not be borne by patients. And it's not only dialysis patients who are affected. Many people depend on home electrical medical equipment, oxygen concentrators, nebulizers, artificial ventilators, stair lifts, bed and bath hoists. Add to this the additional cost for heating and lighting, and many vulnerable people are feeling the pain of this winter. No one should be in a position where they have to cut down use on this vital equipment for fear of paying their bills. So for my daughter-in-law and for all the Hayleys out there who are looking at uncomfortable increases and unaffordable increases, can the government ensure that sufficient financial support is made available to cover these essential electrical medical equipment? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Scope of my comments brief, given the time available. Can I just ask the Minister, in the energy update, the written statement that was published, there was confirmation, and the Prime Minister confirmed this as well, that the Chancellor will set out the expected costs as part of the fiscal statement. Can I ask if those costs will include the government's assumptions of how wholesale prices are going to move over the coming months and years? Yes, it's an estimate, but you have to make some assumptions to calculate the cost. And secondly, and importantly, will the estimates of the costs of this package be independently scored by the Office for Budget Responsibility, or will they simply be the government's assessment of costs? It would be helpful if the Minister winding up the debate could confirm which of those two it will be. Secondly, can I welcome wholeheartedly the confirmation from the Prime Minister that those people who are off the gas grid will be protected by this announcement. A full 40% of my constituents are off the gas grid, and I believe the number is broadly similar in the Prime Minister's own constituency. But a specific question, it's great that there's been confirmation they're going to be helped, but a bit more detail on process is important for this reason. People who buy oil and people that buy LPG tend to buy it in lumps. They have to fill a tank. And they will need to know, if they, for example, were to place an order today to make sure they have sufficient energy, they will need to know whether the costs of that order will be covered by this price guarantee, or whether it will only be for deliveries that take place after the 1st of October. So even though the details may need to be worked through, some confirmation about that I think is incredibly important. It would be terrible if someone on a low income made a very expensive purchase today and then discovered they'd inadvertently cut themselves out of help. But equally, we don't want people running out of energy by delaying those purchases. The final point is just to flesh out what I said in my intervention on the Leader of the Opposition. My understanding is the £170 billion excess profit, over half of that includes profits made by foreign companies on energy supplied to the United Kingdom. That is not within the scope of the Exchequer to be able to tax it. And secondly, we already have a windfall tax. We're already taxing excess profits at a total rate of 65%, and that windfall tax has been legislated for by this House, and it will stretch forward to December 2025. So I don't really know what the Labour Party are arguing for, and I would not say at what rate he thought a windfall tax should raise. 65% seems quite high to me. Helpful if Labour could confirm what they believe it should be.
Sir Ed Davey. Mr. Speaker, following the Speaker's statement earlier, I think all our hearts and thoughts and prayers are elsewhere, but I do want to contribute to the debate and to actually agree with the Honourable Member for the Forest of Dean on his questions on heating oil. I think that's a critical issue for many, many people in rural communities, and we do need answers, and we need them immediately. Mr. Deputy Speaker, what the Prime Minister has just announced is not a freeze on people's energy bills. In the middle of a cost of living emergency, the Conservatives are choosing to put energy bills up by another £500 for struggling families. This hike in people's energy bills comes on top of the £700 rise we saw last April. Struggling families will be paying twice as much for energy as they were last year. People will still be desperately worried about how they're going to keep warm this winter. Last May's £400 discount simply won't make up for this enormous rise in energy bills. So where is the new support for families and pensioners who are struggling? Under the Prime Minister's plan, Mr. Deputy Speaker, fuel poverty will get worse, not better. And turning to the way we think she's proposing to pay for this package, why does it seem the government is handing an eye-watering bill to taxpayers in the form of higher borrowing, which we all know ultimately means higher taxes for taxpayers and particularly for our children? This doesn't seem conservative, it doesn't seem right. Why has she rejected the alternative of a windfall tax on today's oil and gas giants, who are raking in enormous, unexpectedly high profits thanks to President Putin's invasion of Ukraine? How is it fair, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to take money from future taxpayers, from our children, and to hand it to today's oil and gas barons? How is it responsible to borrow so much to pay for consumption when our economy is already in such a mess, with the pound falling so dangerously? And on energy policy, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the fair and responsible policy is to increase investment massively in the cheapest and most popular forms of energy available to us, wind and solar. I was absolutely shocked that the Prime Minister did not announce a massive expansion, a fast expansion of renewables to bring people's energy bills down. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has made some alarming choices today, rejecting cheap wind and solar power, raising people's energy bills even higher than they are now, refusing extra support for struggling families and pensioners, and paying for a policy with higher taxes on our children instead of a windfall tax on fossil fuels. These are the wrong choices.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I start by saying may God bless our Queen? I welcome today's announcement very sincerely. I think it's fantastic that we've seized this massive problem facing us, and it will give huge relief to so many households and businesses who have quite frankly been terrified by the prospect of what was to come, and so having that reassurance now will be greatly pleasing to them, I'm convinced. I did want to just take a couple of minutes, however, to talk about some really low-hanging fruit that I don't think we've made enough of yet, and with current energy prices where they are, there's a lot more that we could do as a government. For example, by going house to house through energy suppliers, not as government officials, but to assist people with looking at how they can reduce their own energy bills. And there are many, many practical ways, not least of which some great ideas for turning down the thermostat on your boiler. Don't do this yourselves at home, but nevertheless, turning that down to make more effective our use of energy. And secondly, things like turning down the hot water tap pressure to actually reduce people's energy bills. These things are really low-hanging fruit that you could do tomorrow, and that forecasters suggest could save up to 10% of energy bills. But most importantly of all is insulation. And again, current energy prices are a game changer for insulation. And some research recently out suggests that £1,000 could pay for the basic cavity wall or loft insulation for the average household, and that the sector could insulate up to 500,000 homes this winter and 1 million homes next year. And that actually would in itself potentially be cost neutral to the Treasury, because of course then the Treasury won't be paying the excess to pay for the price cap. So with energy prices at these levels, it is worth looking again at massively ramping up insulation at household level. And then finally, I won't give way because there's so little time, finally, in terms of businesses, so many have said to me as Business Secretary and then as Chairman of the Backbench Bays Committee, so many businesses say to me, but we can't get a grid connection for our solar panels, so there's no point doing it. Again, I would say to them, with energy prices where they are, you can get yourselves a battery. You could actually have some internal independence in energy, and I think many businesses should be looking at that. And the role of government should be to provide advice through the energy suppliers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I just wanted to echo the comments of my honourable friend from Swansea East with regard to dialysis patients. My late mum was a dialysis sufferer due to her sickle cell, and she dialysed 3 times a week. And one of the reasons she didn't want to switch to home dialysis was because of the costs. So I know that many sickle cell patients who have to have their heating on this winter, and many dialysis patients will be worrying so much about how they will pay their bills. In terms of what the Prime Minister announced earlier this morning, for my constituents in Vauxhall, the next 2 years will be fraught with so many difficulties without the right actions from this government, and the decisions they have made today will impact them for many years to come. And I hope that the Prime Minister and the new government will have this in mind when they make decisions over the next few years. Madam Deputy Speaker, solving the energy crisis is the first test of this new government. Are they going to make big decisions on the oil and gas firms that are making record profits while people up and down this country continue to suffer? Are they going to be fiscally responsible, doing everything in their power to ensure that it lowers the burdens on future generations? Are they going to support families who are already making desperate ends between putting food on the table or heating their homes? I'm afraid to say, on the basis of the announcements we've seen this afternoon and what we've heard from the government, the answer is a resounding no. For many of my constituents in Vauxhall, the cost of living crisis did not start when Ofcom raised the price cap last month. For many of them, it didn't even start when Russia invaded Ukraine earlier this year. The squeeze that they've been seeing in their wages and not keeping up with the prices has been the feature of this government over the last few years. Households have been squeezed relentlessly over decades, and with statistics from the Truss showing that over 20,000 food parcels were distributed in Lambeth between April 2019 and March 2020. The shock of the energy crisis has been severe, but we can't keep ignoring the fact that a number of households have been left in this position as their bills continue to sky high. We can't ignore the fact that the failure to insulate homes over failed insulation policies with the end of the warm front discount introduced by the Labour government. But what do we get from this government? We get the rule book ripped up on fracking while people continue to not see untapped onshore wind potential. We get attack on workers' rights. People taken to lose a day's pay, or in some cases more, to fight for their wage increase and their workers' rights. Yeah. We see scraps of policy on insulation on our homes as our homes continue to bleed the energy they need, bearing the hallmark of the incompetence of the last 12 years of this Conservative government. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, we can't afford to go on like this. Enough is enough. And we need a sea change from this government to recognise the issues that people in Vauxhall and up and down this country are facing. We need a sea change, and we need a new government.
Yeah. Chris Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister, her statement today, setting out 2 broad areas. Firstly, the immediate support she's going to be giving so many people right around the country, and also to businesses like many here, perhaps all here. Many constituents of mine have been getting in touch to say how concerned they are about the cost of energy now and how fearful they are about the cost of energy this coming winter. So the decisive action the Prime Minister's taken is incredibly welcome. But I'd like also to highlight the longer-term vision that she has. We know that much of the problems at the moment are caused by the invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin and the Russian army. But we also look back to the 1970s and the oil crisis, so we can see if we are dependent upon foreign sources of energy for our heating our homes and powering our industry, we're always going to be in a vulnerable place. So I welcome the Prime Minister's ambition for the United Kingdom to have Britain become a net exporter of energy by 2040. I think this is a hugely positive ambition for the United Kingdom, for our industry, and also for the sector itself. And I'd particularly like to emphasise one aspect of the energy sector. I think nuclear needs to form a key part of our energy sector in the United Kingdom. It's that reliable baseload energy we can depend upon come rain or shine. The northwest of England, whether in Cheshire, Lancashire, Cumbria, the northwest of England has a huge talent right across those three counties in the sector, and by investing in this and giving us more security in the sector, we're going to be protecting and securing those jobs. And I'm just thinking as well of Springfields near Preston, the nuclear fuels plant there. We need the security for that plant to ensure it can maintain itself and maintain its staff, the skilled engineers, the skilled apprentices in that site. We need to secure that site and many other places in the northwest of England. Warrington and the wider area, I think, as well, has an enormous wealth of talent. Happy to give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Does the Honourable Member share my concern about one of the announcements around fracking? I'm quite confident that my community won't accept that. And I know certainly the Honourable Member's constituency of Bolton West and those beautiful rural meadows surrounding it. Does he feel that he'll accept that as well?
The Prime Minister is committed to respecting the views and values of local communities, and I support that. But I'm trying to focus on nuclear energy in my short period of time I have to contribute. And I think the other aspect, both in the North West, we want that commitment, but also Hinkley C. That's a phenomenal site, a phenomenal investment in our United Kingdom. And I want to see our commitment to nuclear energy and the phenomenal workforce in that site in Hinkley C in Somerset. I want to see that workforce go on to the next nuclear project and a whole series of nuclear projects, whether it's the full-scale nuclear reactors or whether it's the SMRs. So I think there's a huge potential. I think there's a huge ambition that the Prime Minister is going to set out and the Business Secretary is going to give more details on. And this is immensely positive for so many different parts of our country. And I particularly welcome as well the location of Rolls-Royce SMR headquarters in the City of Manchester as well.
Order. Just before we move on, absolutely no problem with there being interventions. However, I would advise sticking to the 3 minutes because obviously that not everybody is going to necessarily get in. So interventions do mean that the speaker gets an extra minute, which means it's an extra minute of somebody else. So please take interventions, but I would really appreciate it if the colleagues then stuck to the 3 minutes. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I echo the best wishes to Her Majesty. The new Prime Minister takes up her role at a moment when the country is facing a series of multiple crises of staggering proportions, including a likely recession and, let's not forget, the accelerating climate emergency, which, in the words of the IPCC, means that there is, and I say, a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. So this moment required bold, visionary thinking, grounded in compassion, not cold and outdated economic dogma. It called for a retrofit revolution, a massive investment in the home insulation and renewable energy upgrades that could finally deliver warm homes and lower bills. I was staggered that the Prime Minister didn't mention once those demand-side measures that need to be put into the communities around our country so that people can finally have lower bills and warmer homes. What it did not call for were measures that would lock us into further dependence on fossil fuels. Because while Putin's war in Ukraine has accelerated this crisis, it is fundamentally one caused by our dependence on gas, and it won't be solved by extracting more gas, and it certainly won't be solved by a resumption of fracking, which would be a disaster for the climate, and a measure which, as her own Chancellor admitted barely 6 months ago, would do nothing to lower energy bills and would fail to produce enough gas to meet even 1% of our needs for more than the next 3 years. Coming to the detail of her support package, I welcome the fact that she has finally acted on a price freeze, but these measures are nowhere near enough. They are poorly targeted and without a substantial package of additional support will fail to protect millions of low-income families who are already in freefall. They can't cope with current prices, never mind an increase, and that's why my party would return the price cap to its more affordable rate of last October. These measures do nothing to incentivise a reduction in demand, energy demand for those who can do that. And most staggering of all, as we've heard so much, they allow the oil and gas companies to get off scot-free despite the Treasury's own documents showing that energy producers are in line to make 170 billion in excess profits over the next 2 years. So what we need to do is to scrap the shameful investment allowance, put in a windfall tax that is proportionate to the crisis that we face, and make that the first step towards a permanent carbon tax on oil and gas companies to reach, at the very least, the global average of 70%. That would bring the UK in line with countries such as Angola and Trinidad. I want to say I welcome the fact that the government has been consulting on decoupling the price of renewables from gas. That would be a game-changing step. But I also want to ask her to do a massive investment in renewable energy. Renewables are a staggering 9 times cheaper than gas. There are 650 wind and solar projects oven-ready and waiting. That is the way forward, not putting us more into more and more fossil fuels. And finally, will the government look at measures like a rising block tariff approach, which would be much fairer into the future?
Stephen Crabb. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and while the thoughts of the House are first and foremost with Her Majesty the Queen this afternoon, I do think it's important that we take the opportunity to debate these challenges today. I welcome the speed with which the government has moved to bring forward a very strong package of measures that have been announced today. I welcome the substance of that package. I think it provides a very strong platform to help get families through this immediate price crisis. For me, it meets the test of scale, it meets the test of timeliness, and it provides certainty for those families who've been living in a state of, frankly, anxiety, thinking about the enormous bills that have been coming their way. I welcome the assurance from the Prime Minister today that this package will cover everybody, so there won't be gaps. It will cover the more than 50% of households in my constituency who have homes that are off the gas grid and rely on heating oil and LPG. I also want to make sure that people who live in park homes are able to access the support that they need, and there shouldn't be gaps. I still think, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be further measures that we will need to take to strengthen some of the social protection for those on the very lowest incomes, despite the measures that have been announced today. I think there are some easy wins for the government around freezing or limiting the deductions that we take from people's social security payments. I think we should look again at the benefit cap, and I think most importantly, it would be good for this new administration to reiterate the commitment of the last government to do a full social security uprating in the new year. I think it's important, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the measures also cover businesses. I've heard from so many small businesses in my constituency during the summer, particularly the food manufacturers, breweries, so many hospitality and tourism businesses, who for them, frankly, this is an existential issue. These are good businesses, but if prices go the way that are being predicted, frankly, thousands of companies, good companies up and down the country and all of our constituencies will be put out of business. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the measures announced today around strategy for improving UK energy supply, I do strongly welcome these. A number of members have raised different energy sources they want to see more movement on. I would just flag up, Madam Deputy Speaker, the enormous opportunity that's opening up in the Celtic Sea with floating offshore wind. I think this is a really good timely moment for the government working with the Crown Estate to accelerate progress on these projects. But none of that is an immediate answer. None of these new nuclear power stations that some members want to see. In terms of the immediate levers available to government for this winter and a potential energy supply crisis, there aren't many, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we are looking at gas supply. And I would really encourage the government to really sharpen its strategy around procurement of more LNG cargoes, making sure that we can guarantee that we get the energy coming into our system to keep the lights on this winter.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the announcements are welcome, particularly a focus on people who are not on the grid. I would like to highlight to the front bench, and I do hope that they will go away and seek more clarity, for people who resell energy, often landlords in blocks who buy the energy on the commercial market and resell it to their tenants. It's never been explicitly mentioned by the government. They've talked about heat networks, which is if the landlord is running a boiler, but not if you are supplying the electricity directly to that flat. Those meters are not on the official meter grid. They will not be eligible for the £400 support from this government even at the moment, unless action is taken. There needs to be some urgent action there to ensure that the landlords can purchase the prices at fair prices and they pass them on. At the moment, the landlord has to pass it on at the purchase price. I'm not saying landlords are gouging, but there is a problem that the purchase price is a commercial price, not a residential price. So I do hope that they will come back with further clarity on that. But the reality is that this package still is a £500 increase on what energy bills are today. Yes. This is not a reduction, this is an increase, and it didn't need to be like this. It didn't need to be like this because we could have regulated the wholesale market price, and the government could have stepped in and offered loans to energy companies to bridge the gap for the gas that they are importing. That could have been the offer, where the debt was put on the energy companies, not on the state, but that wasn't what has been put forward today. We could have seen the government fixing energy prices at what they are today and making interventions, but they didn't see that either. And so there are some real difficulties with this about who pays. Is it the profits of the companies, or is it the backs of the people? And I'm afraid the wrong choice has been made, because future generations, and even this generation in future years, will be paying for this, and that does not seem right to me. And of course, there were some slight mentions around improvements of efficiencies, but not enough. We need, as my honourable friend has been calling for actually, in my neighbour, a house-to-house, street-by-street approach for insulation and for getting this right. It does not work letting it down to the market. You do not get the efficiencies of scale. Labour has put forward a plan to start that, but it needs even more ambition. And we need to also be looking at the production of wind onshore, not just offshore, onshore, and solar panels on our roofs. At the moment, the solar panel feed-in tariff is less than the cost of buying energy directly from the market. That does not work. We need to reverse that. The incentive needs to be that people are paying into the grid at a fair market price that they are paying out.
Order. Claire Coutinho.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. All summer, like many of you in this House, I've been hearing from households, businesses, schools and other public sector organisations, community centres who've been worried about their energy bills going up fivefold in many cases. So I warmly welcome both the speed of this package and this ambition of this package, which I think will bring much certainty to businesses and peace of mind to households and others. I also welcome that we were very clear, I think, about the discretionary funding that will be provided for users of heating oil, of which I've got many people in my constituency, and also the reform of the electricity pricing market, so non-gas power producers are more fairly priced, therefore lowering the cost for many users as well. And the clarity which I think has been provided for those who are switching contracts and will not face exit penalties, I think will again be very positive for many. Instinctively, I would prefer a targeted support programme. However, I will say from the work that I've been doing for the last 12 months and longer in the Treasury looking at cost of living, there are challenges with that approach in that we know where all the people are who use energy, we know where all the people are who are on benefits, but we don't know much about those middle income people. We did try through a council tax band approach to target a bit more, but it's imperfect. So I think actually the universal approach they've adopted here is the right one. Because we cannot let middle-income households go to the wall. And the truth is, when you have energy prices going up by so much, there are many people who are outside of the benefit system who maybe on £30,000, £40,000 would be hugely struggling right now without this programme. However, we cannot deny that there are problems when you distort price signals through price controls, and therefore I was very pleased to hear the Prime Minister talk about energy efficiency and energy security and supply, which will be critical if we get through this period. And lastly, I just wanted to come back on this windfall tax point that's been mentioned multiple times by the opposition, the £170 billion, which they know those profits are not being made here and are not taxable. And the reason I know they know that is they set out their own plans a week ago, and actually they only wanted to recoup £8 billion from the oil and gas companies. So if they really truly thought there was £170 billion up for grabs, and we know how much they love grabbing profits, why did they not set out 20, 30, 50, even £100 billion? It's because they know that's not possible. And actually we did put forward an increase in their taxes, and oil and gas companies are paying not the 19% corporation tax that other companies are paying, not even the 40% that they pay normally, but 65%, two-thirds of their profits are coming into the tax system. And as much as possible that they can invest the rest of it, that's what we will need for long-term solutions to protect our households, our businesses, our schools, our charities and more.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Under Prydarydd, mi hoffwn yn anfon dymuniad agorau I Yw Marwdy y Frenhines. I too would like to send my best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen. Today's announcement shows beyond doubt whose side the new Prime Minister is on. She's prepared to force taxpayers to carry the burden of borrowing billions of pounds in order to subsidise the shareholders of energy companies who are profiting from Putin's war. And it's shocking she can't even tell us how much that burden is going to cost today. I must urge her to think again. Make energy companies pay their fair share. The global energy norm of energy profit taxation is 70%. Norway stands at 78%. Why does the population of the UK have to suffer the combined yokes of higher taxes, worse public services and falling real wages while private profit is protected under her premiership? Use that money to return the energy price cap to the pre-April level of £1,277 per year and extend that cap to small businesses and charities. People are struggling now. Even at current prices, 180,000 households in Wales are forced to struggle even to afford items such as heating, food and toiletries. Bills of £2,500 are unaffordable for many, many people. Anything short of £1,277 as a cap will fail to meet the scale of the crisis we face. And it will require her government, and this is important, to bring forward additional packages of support for vulnerable households, including doubling the £650 cost of living payment and revising the eligibility criteria to include those on disability benefits who are currently excluded from support. This will cost us more in future if we don't face what is genuinely facing us now. But, of course, what we're calling on her here is instead of pursuing fantasy economics of rampant deregulation and tax cuts for the rich, the Prime Minister must also prioritise reduction in energy demand and investment in low-carbon sources. That's the only way to bring down energy bills in the medium and long term. Finally, and to be clear and simple on this, it is time to unchain Wales's renewable and low-carbon energy potential by vastly improving our grid capacity, bringing forward SMRs at Transfynydd in my constituency and Wilver and other places as well, empowering Welsh Government to deliver large-scale transformative infrastructure projects such as tidal lagoons, devolving management of the Crown Estate to Wales and enabling community energy schemes to realise their full potential by selling their power directly to local customers. For us in Wales, it is now clear that in the long term, to fix this crisis for good, we must place our energy system and its huge potential in the hands of the people of Wales for the benefit of the people of Wales.
Dean Russell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and given the announcement earlier, may I also send my best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen from myself and also from all those across Watford. The announcement today, I felt, was a very important one. Over the summer, I spent lots of time volunteering with organisations, including the Citizens Advice Bureau, through to working in the British Heart Foundation shop, and I heard firsthand the challenges that people are feeling around the fears that they have around the fuel crisis and their bills. And what we heard today was a significant package which will help people immediately, but also deal with the long-term challenges that we face, whilst also making sure economically that it does work. Because as we all know, windfall taxes are a one-off, potentially a two-off, if you could call it that. But once you get to the third or fourth try, it's not going to work. And so what we need is something that works immediately, long-term, but also puts us on a competitive footing around the world. And what we did here today, which I thought was a really important point, was about the fact that by 2040, we want to be a net energy exporter. And what does that mean? It means many things. It doesn't just mean the important part about our own fuel security, but it actually means investment in jobs, investment in education, investment in skills, investment in business, to make sure that we're looking ahead, not to be not only in this situation again, because we do not want to be in this situation again, but also to help other countries around the world not be in this position again, because of the fact that we are actually looking long term. One final point I wanted to make, because I'm conscious you would like short speeches, and if anything, I am short. I would just say this, that's, I think, very important. I studied physics at university. I'm probably one of the few MPs that studied nuclear physics as part of my course, not that I was that great at it. But I think the talk of nuclear moving forward is so important. We have had a negative image of nuclear over many, many decades, and the opportunity to small modular nuclear reactors that go across this country that enable us to have safe, green energy that entire communities can rely upon is absolutely essential. But also I think there's an infrastructure of skills and education that go into that. So I would just say I massively welcome this package. I think it's the right package. There's more to do, of course, as always, but I welcome the debate today, and I think let's be certain on one thing that we need to say to all of our residents who are at the moment fearful of what may come, that this will support them in the short term. People may disagree about what the long-term approach is. I think this will support them now, it will support them in winter, and they should feel reassured that they're going to be okay. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Great, Davis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when people talk about famines, they think about food shortages, but what famines are, in fact, is a combination of higher prices alongside lower wages, and we are approaching famine conditions in Britain because after 12 years of UK austerity with cuts in services, frozen wages, devaluation of the pound, people are much weaker facing the tsunami of price rises we've seen from Putin's brutal war. And the response we've seen from the oil companies, of course, is that their operating costs are just the same, that the prices go up, they make windfall profits, that they've picked the pockets of British people, and we demand our money back. There is a sort of windfall tax at the moment. That should be continued at international rates, has been said, so we don't face a situation where there's yet another increase of another £500 on people's household budgets. Millions of people are in desperate poverty and simply can't afford that. The Prime Minister rightly talks about growth. What she needs to remember is that the OECD have found that growth is less if there's greater inequality. Yet at the same time, she's talking about giving back national insurance, where the bottom 10% will get an extra £7.60, the top 10% will get £1,800. So in other words, she will be increasing inequality through putting more burdens onto households, giving the rich more in tax giveaways, including national insurance, and not taxing the excess and unjustified profits of big corporations. The OECD also found that growth was very much linked to the education of the poorest, and the ambition of the government is simply to get education spending up to 2010 levels by 2024, but they won't even achieve that because of inflation. Coretta King famously said that poverty is a child without an education, and we've seen education standards now fall through the pandemic, in particular for the poorest, so we need to invest there. Meanwhile, we've got a situation where the government's provoking a trade war with the EU over the protocol. Bank of England rates are likely to go up. They're provoking strikes with the trade union movement. But what we want is growth. And what we saw with the Labour Party in the 10 years to 2008 was 40% growth in the economy that allowed us to invest double investment in education, and in health, and had trend growth continued from the Labour government, the average income in Britain would be £10,000 more, so they'd be more resilient to these external shocks of the pandemic and the energy crisis. So we need to think about that, and we need to invest very much in hydrogen instead of fracking, and invest in renewables instead of more and more oil.
Order. Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I join with all colleagues here and not here in sending the warmest wishes of support from everyone in Gloucester to Her Majesty the Queen and members of the royal family. Today's announcement, made within 48 hours of the new government being formed, no small achievement, will bring huge certainty and reassurance to residents in my constituency and elsewhere, and also to those living in park homes, in charities and across the public sector, as well as small businesses in particular who are already suffering. And this is absolutely critical because it does put a cap on the maximum average energy bill. And I do think, Madam Deputy Speaker, the crucial word is maximum, because as the Right Honourable Member for South Northamptonshire said earlier, there are huge advantages to a programme of advice and best practice being led by the government in helping us all to reduce our energy consumption. Schools, for example, could hugely benefit from solar panels that could sell all the energy generated during the long summer holidays into the grid and thereby bringing down their annual bills considerably. So there are lots of good things to welcome in today's announcement, but there are three things in particular I would like to raise with the ministers on the front bench. Firstly, the green levies that are now going to be temporarily suspended have, of course, already been committed elsewhere. So who is going to pay for them now? Presumably the taxpayer in general. Secondly, the NIC, the National Insurance Contribution increase, was predicted to raise £36 billion over 3 years for health and care budgets. So how is that now going to be delivered? Because the task before our new Health Secretary is big on generating better outcomes, but reducing the inputs will surely make that harder. Thirdly, then, the contribution of energy companies. We've heard a lot today, and quite rightly, about how they are already paying some 66% tax in real terms. But nonetheless, there is a huge difference between profits, which are good, and war profiteering, which is bad. And I do think the new Secretary of State could shed light on how the energy companies are going to contribute to this national challenge. Lastly, then, on fracking, the Honourable Member for Vauxhall said that the rules were going to be completely ripped up, the rules on fracking. I don't think that is the case, because the crucial barrier is that of local support, which has been conspicuously absent so far. So I doubt we will see any real change in practice. And there is one last thing, Madam Deputy Speaker, to add. A lot has been said about the welcome commitment by this government to nuclear and renewables, quote, embracing diverse sources of energy, unquote. And can I just encourage the new Secretary of State to follow the great example of his predecessor in supporting marine energy?
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I paid particular attention to the very, very small note which came out from the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy earlier, and the particular line that says this will save the typical household £1,000 a year. £1,000 a year, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's almost like the cap which is being put in place at £2,500 a year isn't double what energy prices were just last summer. It's almost as if the government doesn't understand the sheer scale of the financial problems facing households right across the country, because of course it's not just about energy prices. Inflation is at a 40-year high, interest rates are at a 30-year high, wages are at a 20-year low, and yet we're being told we should be happy about energy bills being frozen at £2,500 per year. It's absurd. It's not just households are going to be struggling, it's obviously going to be businesses as well. We've heard a number of businesses spoken about in the chamber here today, and I think I've spent most of the summer having emails from businesses who are being utterly crippled by the costs that are in front of them. And up till now, the government hasn't even lifted a finger. And what they are proposing will not go far enough. Businesses will continue to close because of energy prices. And this whole debate really frustrates me for a particular reason. Because I happen to represent a constituency which is famed for oil and gas production. Somewhat ironically, of course, it was the unionist parties within this chamber who told us in 2014 that oil and gas was running out, and yet now they're telling us there's going to be an addition of 100 new licences given. But barring that irony, is it not absurd that energy-rich Scotland, which produces 6 times more gas than we produce, is even having to face an energy price crisis? When it comes to electricity, gas makes up just 14.4% of our electricity production, but yet the price of that gas dictates all. The fact that the vast majority of our electricity comes from low-carbon sources means absolutely nothing. The fact that it comes primarily from renewables means absolutely nothing when it comes to the costs that are being imposed upon the people of Scotland by this UK government and the continued failure of their energy policy. So if the UK government want to do just one thing, as a suggestion to the new Secretary of State, will this government finally decouple renewables from gas prices? That would make a huge difference, and of course it wouldn't cost a single penny.
Here. Dame Marie Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And following the Speaker's earlier announcement, can I join others by passing my warmest wishes on behalf of the people of Basingstoke to Her Majesty the Queen and her family. But can I also very warmly welcome the rapid action the Government and the Prime Minister has taken since the formation of the new government earlier this week. Not only the short-term support that's been announced today, but also the focus on the long-term solutions to the problems that we're facing. Clearly, the energy price guarantee will provide an enormous amount of certainty and reassurance to many, many families, including those who've contacted me over the summer months. And I think perhaps the government will want to take some time to ensure that there's clarity, just following on from some of the contributions today, about how the new energy price guarantee will sit alongside the existing energy bill support scheme, which will already provide a great deal of support to many of the vulnerable groups who honourable members across the House have referred to today, because it's both of those schemes which are going to make sure that people get the support and certainty they need at these difficult times. I was particularly pleased to hear, Madam Deputy Speaker, following some representations I've had from people who live in park homes and who are also on heat networks and have, and as many of my constituents do, use heating oil, that particular support will be in place there. But can I echo the comments of the honourable member for my right honourable friend, the member for Forest of Dean? It would be useful to know exactly how that support will come into play. I was also extremely pleased to hear from the Prime Minister the support for businesses, charities and public services that will be equivalent to the support for residential properties for 6 months. Can I again suggest that understanding quickly how that might work in practice will be helpful, particularly for charities who will be planning ahead, up to 12 months ahead, on how their operations will work. Many of those charities, of course, are community centres, village halls who run childcare facilities essential to our residents. And then finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, could I take this opportunity of broadening the debate by encouraging the government to look at those industries who've been hit by the increase in gas prices. And here I'm particularly talking about the fertiliser industry. I met farmers in my own constituency on Friday, and as Madam Deputy Speaker will know, gas is used to create fertiliser, and that's why it's relevant to this debate, and that scaling back of production throughout Europe is leaving many farmers, particularly in my constituency, sowing seed for harvest next year without knowing that that fertiliser is going to be in place. So maybe the government can make an early statement on how we're going to make sure surety of supply of fertilisers given the impact of gas prices on their production. We are in a difficult situation. I'm pleased the government has made such a speedy
order. Just to point out that if colleagues were less than 3 minutes, we'd get more people in. Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We must not forget that for months this Tory government saw the oncoming tidal wave of rising energy bills this winter, yet chose to do nothing about it. For months they callously and deliberately left people in limbo, creating unimaginable uncertainty for people who faced colossal energy bills this Christmas. And for months they let fear spread amongst those preparing to make a desperate choice between heating their home or putting food on their table. Yet what is worse is that for months the current Prime Minister, who was a minister in this government for a decade, was content to go along with this grossly negligent plan of inaction, wasting valuable time when we could have been protecting people. And as we heard the Prime Minister today on that dispatch box, she used the word immediate, she used the word urgent support on a number of occasions. Well, frankly, that's disingenuous, because the Prime Minister cannot suddenly pretend that she's entered Parliament today. She has been a senior minister in previous governments for the last decade, and frankly speaking, she could have taken action along with the previous government months ago and not put people through this uncertainty. Madam Deputy Speaker, addressing a number of other smoke and mirrors, as is customary from the party opposite. Firstly, we've heard the reference to price freeze on a number of occasions. Well, that's simply not true. The point that has been made by other speakers is what we are seeing is a price rise of at least £500 from what people are currently paying, and hundreds more from what people were originally paying. Hundreds of pounds more than my constituents can afford to pay. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we also have heard silence today. Silence from the Prime Minister on who actually will pay for it. What is absolutely clear, and the Prime Minister has made this spelled this out crystal clear, is the people that will not pay for it is the corporate oil and gas barons that have made £170 billion profit. And in this, her first week as Prime Minister, she has made it absolutely clear that her direction of travel is to continue to drive a wedge between those that continue to get wealthier in this country and those that continue to suffer poverty, and that she will always side on the big corporates as opposed to ordinary working people. Thank you.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I also send my deepest thoughts and good wishes to Her Majesty the Queen and to her family, as I'm sure the people of Dudley North would want to send as well. We know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that too many people have borne the brunt of COVID in recent times, and now too many people are bearing the cost of living crisis, which we now find ourselves in. Some of them ask me, Marco, what are you doing to help us? I'm going to have to choose whether to turn on my hot water or feed my children. And when it comes to local businesses, a local owner has contacted me this week saying they are having extreme difficulties with energy prices, so much so that they feel they have no choice but to streamline staff in order to continue trading and paying their bills. No one ever should really find themselves in a position where they have to make these kinds of choices, whether a business or a household. Ordinary hard-working people should not be suffering with anxiety about how they will make ends meet this winter. I, like our new Prime Minister, want to ensure that my constituents, and indeed all of our constituents, get the support they need, and we have the certainty for the months ahead. And so therefore I'm pleased that she's taking this action immediately to provide support and peace of mind for so many. Madam Deputy Speaker, the words I would like to use to describe Vladimir Putin are not appropriate for the polite company of this House. But it is because of him we sit in this House having this very debate. Now, of course, COVID did play a large part in the cost of living crisis, but it is Putin's bully boy tactics cutting off Europe's energy supply, plunging us into the freezing waters that we are facing. Putin did not care if Jenny in Gornal can feed her children, get them to school. Putin does not care if Dorothy in Sedgley can heat her home in her old age. Putin does not care if John in Dudley has to close his business and lay off all his staff because he can't pay his energy bill and continue to employ them. Putin just does not care, but I do, and I know all of us here do. Winter is coming, and we know what could come with it, but it does not need to be an inevitability, and now, thanks to our new Prime Minister, it will not be. The long-term plan to strengthen and secure Britain's energy supplies and to reopen up the North Sea and open up fracking and investing in nuclear will ensure our children and grandchildren do not face these issues as they reach our grand old ages. The new support being pledged today goes a long way to reassure individuals, families and our local businesses. Our new Prime Minister is on our side, not just in the short term, but in the long term.
Cooper. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier this week I raised the plight of households... Sorry? It's okay? Sorry. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier this week, I raised the plight of households, small businesses and care homes in my constituency. And I'm sure, like me, many of them will be truly shocked that it is the British public that will have to bear the burden of paying for this energy crisis, whilst energy companies continue to make their millions. But today I have a number of very specific questions that I'd like to put to ministers on the front bench, and I would ask whether they might address them in their summing up. First of all, the written statement talks about an equivalent guarantee for businesses, but does that include care homes specifically? And what additional support will be given to care homes, given the pressure that they are under? Women's street safety. I've had an email from my county council, Hertfordshire County Council, saying that the bill to keep street lights on has increased by 60% in just a few short months, and it already now costs an extra £2.3 million a year to keep the lights on after it goes dark. They are not yet talking about turning the lights off, but if they do, are there contingency measures in place to ensure that we keep crime down, that people are safe, particularly women, on our streets after dark? On park homes, I welcome the fact that there is a fund for park homes to cover people with heating oil and heat networks. But how will this fund work? How big will it be? And will there be an information campaign to those people who can benefit from it? The government's own estimates suggest that 1 in every 100 households are impacted by having this non-conventional relationship. Now, by my calculations, that's more than 250,000 properties. So for each of them to receive £400, that would need to be at least £100 million in that fund. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to have a revolution in renewables. RES is the world's largest independent renewable company. It's based in my constituency of St Albans, and it has more than 40 years' experience and expertise. RSE tells me, and Friends of the Earth agree, that footnote 54 of the National Planning Policy Framework stops them from installing new onshore wind farms, even in areas where there are no objections from local residents. Now, I am absolutely no fan of fracking, but it is obscene and absurd that this government is saying that it's okay to reopen fracking where communities are okay with it, but you're not going to reopen onshore wind where communities are okay with it. So please, please review that footnote. And finally, on solar panels. In January of this year, I asked the Housing Secretary if they may have a requirement to make all new suitable buildings have solar panels. The government has not conducted that assessment of how big the roof space is that's available, but I would urge BEIS to go further than looking at the floor space that's available and look at the of these non-domestic buildings and work out precisely how much roof space is available right now for having solar panels installed. Thank you.
Virginia Crosby, but let me emphasise again, if everybody was 2 minutes, we'd have a much better chance of everybody getting in.
Deputy Speaker, may I too share my thoughts and prayers for our Queen and her family. The energy crisis has hit rural communities like mine on Ynys particularly badly. On Ynys schools, shops and employment are often too far away for walking, and public transport is sparse. A car is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And our farming community relies on vehicles and fuel-driven equipment, meaning that their cost of production has risen significantly. We have a larger than average elderly population who need to stay warm in our sometimes harsh winters. And many of my constituents are reliant on LPG and gas to fuel their homes. And this is common in rural communities, but there's often little local competition. And with no price cap in place, families are vulnerable to steeply rising costs. And I'm pleased that this is in an area that is being addressed. My Untitled constituents need help, and they need help today over the coming months to heat and power their homes and businesses. And our Prime Minister has now outlined her plans. And this support, on top of the £37 billion already committed by the former Chancellor, means that I'm hugely proud of what we're doing to help with the immediate problem. But we need to do more to protect the UK from these crises in the future, and I know that our Prime Minister has not lost sight of the longer term whilst providing support in the short term, and I welcome her enthusiasm for nuclear. She's already spoken about the need to take back control of our energy security, invest now in large-scale energy production, and incentivise communities to support energy production in their area. The people of Untitled, which is also known as Energy Island, already welcome this production locally. We've got companies like Morlice and Monesto who have received government backing to set up tidal energy systems off our shores. We're home to stretches of onshore wind and solar farms thanks to government subsidies and support. We have Wilver, once a flagship of British nuclear power, with all the potential to reclaim that position following this government's commitment in the British Energy Security Strategy and the new Nuclear Financing Act. And the Holyhead Hydrogen Hub received £4.8 million of funding in last year's budget. With companies like Bechtel and Rolls-Royce keen to re-establish nuclear production at Wilver, and BP Mona looking to Untitled to support large wind farms in the Irish Sea, my constituency can be at the forefront of UK power generation for decades to come. A new large-scale nuclear plant at Wilver on Anglesey could generate enough power for every home in Wales and more. And small modular reactors could provide cheap energy to local family and businesses in shorter timescales. On behalf of my Untitled constituents, it's important that this government takes into account the unique energy demands on rural communities' short-term energy support plans, and that we grasp the benefits of incentivising communities to welcome local energy production so that we can secure our long-term domestic energy supply swiftly.
Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 6 months ago, households faced energy bills of £1,300. Today, we're told that doubling that and fixing prices at £2,500 is the best we can do to help. It's not. People were struggling last winter with their energy bills, and many more will be struggling this winter too, with prices doubled. Private energy profits are being put before the needs of people, all whilst energy firms are set to make £170 billion in excess profits. This is a huge transfer of wealth, with big corporations hoovering up even more of the wealth in society, paid for by millions of ordinary people. But the new Prime Minister and former Shell employee has been frank. Energy firms, in her view, should be able to keep those undeserved excess profits. A different principle should guide us. These companies should not be allowed to make a single penny in excess profits from this crisis. That will require a package of measures, from public ownership to full windfall taxes to caps on the prices that North Sea oil and gas can be sold at, all guided by the principle that energy should be run for the public good. The public supports those policies. There are growing movements for them. This debate is not going away. Today has not solved this crisis. Today's limit on energy prices is not a limit on the profits of North Sea oil and gas companies. Without the windfall tax, today is about protecting their profits at great social cost. The claim that we need to do this to guarantee the investment by North Sea oil and gas firms is completely bogus, because they were investing when they were making their normal profits just a few months ago. They were never expecting this windfall, and taxes on oil and gas companies, including in Norway's North Sea fields, are much higher than here, even at current windfall tax rates. Energy security can't be achieved by making ourselves more dependent on the expensive fossil fuels that have driven this crisis. We don't need more North Sea explorations. We don't need fracking. Let's be clear, this gas won't be cheaper, it will be sold at world prices. And anyway, gas is 9 times more expensive than renewables. Retrofitting would save people money and reduce our gas use. So this greater reliance on fossil fuels is quite simply ideological. This government is using this crisis to undermine its own inadequate climate responsibilities. The profits of fossil fuel companies are being put before the people and before planets. This approach is quite simply failing people today hit by higher bills, and I'm afraid it will also fail future generations hit by climate catastrophe.
Mike Wood.
Mr. Speaker, the speed and the scale of the support announced by the Prime Minister is hugely welcomed, and it's obviously hugely necessary. For the many households who simply could not have afforded energy bills of £3,500, it will make a real difference, together with the £400 payments to each household, the £650 to those on low incomes, and the £300 going to pensioner households. I hope that we can have some clarification on what is the position of those residential properties that are on commercial meters, perhaps because they were converted from previous commercial businesses. It'll also make a real difference to many businesses, whether that's in energy-intense businesses like ceramics and glassmaking in my constituency, whether it's in hospitality. But simply, perhaps we can have further clarification on what is the position for those businesses who've had to recently enter into new contracts. Will they still be able to switch to the new price cap or the new support that is being announced? In terms of the criticisms that have been made, windfall tax, I mean, there is some political, some superficial political attraction to extending windfall tax. Of course, we do already have a windfall tax set at 25% on top of the 40% tax that's already paid by British oil and gas producers. But I think the attraction is more political and more superficial than it is real and effective, in that the revenue that an extension would raise would be very, very small compared to the scale of the cost of the support that is necessary. It would affect less than half of the oil and gas that we use in the UK, because less than half is produced in the UK. And by making UK oil and gas production less competitive, it will, in the medium and the long term, reduce our energy security at the worst possible time. This is something we can't afford. It's also been suggested it will affect price signals. Now, as a reformed economist, I know that economists can sometimes dwell a bit too much on good theory and ignore the real world, but I find it hard to credit that people's behaviour is different if the price cap is £2,500, that they're more careful with their energy than they would have been at the extra £1,000. Clearly, if energy was free, there would be huge costs, but I think we're already at a level where people are being very careful with what they use. This package is the right package, it's an effective package. We need to get it into household and businesses' pockets so that...
Pascal.
Speaker, whilst any help is welcome, this is insufficient by far for the poor and generous in the extreme for the rich. Energy-rich, the perversity of an energy-rich Scotland and fuel-poor Scots remains, and what's clear is that not only will people go cold this winter, but some may well die. There should have been a pool freeze. It should have been funded by a windfall tax. There should have been action on VAT. And there are other emissions that haven't been addressed or where clarity remains. Changing the dysfunctional energy market, not just in accelerating nuclear or fracking, and addressing the iniquities that still exist and haven't been touched or at least made clear. First of all, there's prepayment meters. The injustice remains that the poorest, those most deprived, those often most dependent upon the need for power and energy, see themselves paying higher standing charges and higher tariffs. That hasn't been touched while support has been given to the very wealthy. That must end. It's easily done. A direction to Ofgem, and we all know that the energy companies are capable of delivering it. Similarly, unregulated fuels. Whilst it's a welcome announcement that some action has been taken, if it's simply to be a discretionary fund, then that is inadequate. It is especially the case in the north of Scotland, but it's also the situation in my own constituency, that people are off the gas grid, they're dependent upon heating oil, biomass or other fuels. They shouldn't just be available for some fund they may be able to dip into. They should be regulated, The Secretary should be ensuring that that is done and action should be taken, because those in often the most climatically cold areas are the ones that are going to be suffering. And the dysfunctional system remains. We have seen our electricity system tied to the price of gas. 97% of Scotland's domestic electricity supply is provided by renewables, and yet we are paying sky-high prices dependent upon foreign gas prices, as opposed to renewables that are on our doorstep and over which we have a surfeit. That is perverse, especially when, as has been said by others, Scotland is self-sufficient in gas. This simply rewards the rich. It doesn't address the problems of the poor. It is inadequate. Enough is enough, and this is not enough to end the crisis, nor is it enough to end the action that will be taken by people.
Lord Trout.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my thoughts and prayers, along with everyone in Sevenoaks and Swanley, are with Her Majesty the Queen and the Royal Family at this time. But turning to the announcement today, I warmly welcome it. It will relieve a huge amount of anxiety for my constituents, for businesses such as Donington Manor, who are worried about being crippled by prices, and for schools such as Dunton Green, whose energy bills were going up by 500%. I'm glad that we have heating oil and heat networks included in this, although I will question as to whether the prices will be frozen for them, because obviously they've gone up extensively this year already, tripled in some cases, Boucher Court, for example, the heat network. So it would be helpful to have clarification as to whether that price will be frozen for them or it will be allowed to go up, and then we'll compensate them later. But I wanted to add in an additional idea, which I've spoken about in this House previously. With water supply, it is illegal to cut off water supply to a household. You can recoup the cost of your water company by going through the courts, but you cannot cut off supply for reasons of non-payment. And I think this is something that we should look at extending to energy supply, because there are some protections in place. You're not allowed as an energy company to cut off supply during the winter months if a person lives on their own, if there's someone of state pension age in there, or if there's a child in the house. However, there is not enough protection, in my view, and Ofgem showed that 1 in 7 households on a prepayment meter disconnected in 2019. This is something that I think we should look at seriously. You know, we cannot have that number of disconnections, which are only likely to go up, when actually there's something that we can do that will send a very clear message to energy suppliers and to consumers that they will be safe this winter. They do not need to worry about if it really comes to it, their energy supplies will not be cut off. There will still be that mechanism by which costs could be recouped, but it will mean that there is a safety net in place for everybody, and I think that will go a huge way to providing reassurance for people. But I welcome the announcement today. I think that it will really help my constituents, and I hope to see further effort and work being put in place in terms of ensuring our energy supplies to households. Good stuff.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I too send my best wishes to Her Majesty and her family. Now, we all recognise the need to help people with fuel bills, and there is huge support amongst the public for a further windfall tax on the oil and gas companies. As the companies have explained themselves, they'll still have plenty of money for future investment, even after they've paid an additional windfall tax. The point is that the money is there now on the table for the government to use on behalf of the people of the UK to pay for help with fuel bills. But under the government's plans, however it's worked out, the point is that it will be paid for by taxpayers. It is utterly disgraceful that the government is not imposing a windfall tax to cover these energy costs. Now, I do welcome the mention by the Prime Minister of those who are off-grid and rely on heating oil, and those who live in homes with arrangements like Park Homes or Poplar Court in Cross Hands, where they do not have a bill directly from an energy company. But all these households need to know as soon as possible how and when they will receive support and exactly how much it will be. The government's got an appalling record on home insulation, energy efficiency, renewables and the transition away from fossil fuels. On insulation, we've repeatedly called for a massive investment programme to insulate 9 million homes, 2 million of which could already have been done by this winter. Investment in renewables, Madam Deputy Speaker, is vital in tackling climate change and increasing energy security. But now, with these rapidly rising and unpredictable gas prices, the economic case is ever stronger. The Tory government has wasted years of precious time in the development of renewables, including the moratorium on on constructing onshore wind farms in England and the reduction in support for solar panels. We should have been far further ahead by now in our production of electricity through renewable means, and the fact we're not is an abject failure by this government to stimulate the production of renewables. Luckily, we have the devolved powers in Wales, and we were able to continue with the development of wind power. But then we had the reluctance of the Conservative government to look at the Swansea tidal lagoon. But now, thanks to the initiative, imagination and hard work of Labour-controlled City and County of Swansea, the project will go forward. The government also cut the electrification plans for the railway line from Cardiff to Swansea and has no plans for electrification further to West Wales, on the grounds that it would not shorten the journey time. But if we generate electricity from renewables, then electrification not only helps to tackle climate change, but it also now will bring price stability. So words are not enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. We now need the government to make a massive effort to increase the production of electricity from all forms of renewables, on and offshore wind, tidal and other marine technologies, and solar, and, importantly, to invest in the national grid to ensure we can all benefit from this renewable production. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we want action.
Felicity Bracken, who has 1 minute. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to warmly welcome this bold, decisive and comprehensive measure. I think it's exactly the right thing. I welcome in particular the measures on communal heating networks, which are huge in my constituency with all of my mansion blocks. And I like the fact that we are focused on self-reliance. I try to intervene on the Leader of the Opposition because he quite rightly talked about self-reliance when it comes to energy. But the reason partly that we're not self-reliant is because between 1997 and 2010, the Labour Party failed to invest in renewables and energy, and our dependence on gas went from 32% to 46%. So all measures here are welcome. I welcome the commitment to net zero, and I welcome the investment in renewables.
Yeah. Shadow Secretary of State, Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I address the issues in this debate, I want to send my best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen and her family, and I know all of our thoughts and those of the country are with them at this time. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are two central questions at the heart of this debate. Has the government responded to the emergency that we face in a way that is fair? And do they recognise the fundamental truth that the only way to end this crisis in the long term is to get off fossil fuels? And I'm afraid the answer on today's evidence to both questions is no. Let me start with the plan unveiled by the Prime Minister earlier. Labour led the way on the energy price freeze. We called for it, despite doubts, including from the Prime Minister. I'm glad she's admitted that she was wrong about that, because we heard throughout this debate, and I want to thank all honourable and right honourable members who've spoken in this debate, and we've heard disagreements on each side on this, but we've heard an agreement about the scale of the emergency facing families. That's why we spent the summer fighting for the energy price freeze. But the devil will be in the detail, and people will want to see the small print. And I do say that the problem is that bills do still seem to be rising by at least £129 a year. And the even bigger problem, the fundamental issue in this debate, has been who pays. The Right Honourable Lady has been clear that she is against a windfall tax. We know the effects of this, Madam Deputy Speaker. It means all of the costs are loaded onto the British people. And let's dispose of the argument that this is somehow not about higher taxes. In the end, this will have to be paid for by the British people in higher taxes. So the question is not whether we are going to tax to pay for this, but who we are going to tax. Now let's take the arguments we've heard in this debate against the windfall tax, and let's take them apart one by one. First, the argument that a windfall tax will reduce investment. Is there any truth to this? As my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, said in his eloquent speech, the BP boss says it won't have an effect on investment. He said, when asked which investments it would affect, he said none of them. So even BP don't believe the argument the Prime Minister is mounting in defence of BP. Next, we've heard the argument that a windfall tax can't raise extra money beyond what the former Chancellor announced. Let us dispose of this argument too, Madam Deputy Speaker. I gather there is a dispute about this 170 billion in excess profits. Well, I say the Chancellor's not here, but I say to the Prime Minister, we'll publish the Treasury's estimate of the excess profits. If it's not 170 billion, we have it on good authority, it is 170 billion. Publish the estimates so we can all see them for ourselves. In any case, we know, I think I'm not going to give way because I've got little time for the wind-up. In any case, we know there are tens of billions that could be raised. First of all, there are significant resources from the windfall tax on the oil and gas companies, including abolishing the absurd £5 billion loophole proposed by the Chancellor. Next, there are the electricity generators. Now, we need to de-link the price of gas and electricity, but that will not happen for a number of years. In the meantime, these companies are making enormous profits. Onward, a Conservative think tank, said this week up to 10 billion a year can be raised. The Tony Blair Institute said 14 billion. We could even have a cross-party consensus on this. Why would we leave this money in their pockets when it could help pay for this action on energy? Now, I say to the government, the alternative which they appear to have adopted is to make a voluntary agreement where the companies decide to opt in to reduce prices. But I do say to the House, this is a terrible proposal. It came originally from Energy UK, because in exchange for giving up some profits now, the deal is to lock in higher prices over the next 15 years. This is not a good deal for consumers, Madam Deputy Speaker. Indeed, there is a chart. Because I'm a nerd, I read these charts. There is a chart published by Energy UK which precisely sets out the fact that consumers will pay through the nose over the 15 years ahead. The third and final argument we've heard in this debate is that, and indeed from the Prime Minister, is it somehow unfair to business. Here I would take advantage of the Prime Minister being here to recommend to her. She reads an article by Mr. Erwin Stelzer, who's a long-time confidant of Rupert Murdoch, and in my experience of Tory leaders, it's worth their while to stay on the right side of him. He wrote this: "Now is the time for a windfall profit tax," he said. "People who believe in capitalism believe that private sector companies should be rewarded for taking risks, not be rewarded for happening to be around when some disruption drives up prices, producing windfalls. In this case, the barbaric invasion of Ukraine." So what is the principle that the Prime Minister is defending here? What is the hill on which she stands? Is the principle she really wishes to defend that oil and gas companies should pocket any scale of profits, however bad the political instability, however large the crisis and however gigantic the windfall, taxation must not change, and that the British people instead must take the strain? That is the effect of her argument. And I do say, Madam Deputy Speaker, the argument I'm making is not one simply made by lefty suspects like me. Margaret Thatcher, her heroine, she imposed a windfall tax in 1981. George Osborne, who she worked for, imposed a windfall tax in 2011. Boris Johnson, her very close friend, he imposed, I think she's disavowing George Osborne, but anyway, he imposed, I can understand that, Madam Deputy Speaker. He imposed a windfall tax 2 months ago. So she is flying in the face of logic, fairness, common sense, and engaging in tens of billions of borrowing that she does not need to do. And let me make this point. Let us never, ever again hear lectures from the party opposite on fiscal responsibility after the decisions they are making today. And that brings me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the longer term. Let us face facts. The only way out of this crisis is to get off fossil fuels. I can't do any better than to quote the words of Lord Deben this week. And he said this: if you want to deal with climate change and you want to deal with the cost of living crisis and oil and gas, you have to do the same thing. Renewable energy and energy efficiency, and indeed I would add nuclear, they are the answers. And that is the central point. Solar and wind energy are 9 times cheaper than gas. You can't solve the fossil fuel crisis by doubling down on fossil fuels. Exactly. But that is what the government has done today with this announcement on fracking. And my right honourable friend quoted the words of the current, of the new Chancellor in relation to this, which is that fracking would make no difference to prices and would take years to come on screen. I don't know where the Honourable Lady got her 6 months from that she said in her statement, but the Chancellor was saying only a few months ago it would take 10 years to get anything out of the ground on fracking. The truth is, And this is where I come to the business secretary, and I want to congratulate him. He and I have known each other a long time. We've had a good personal relationship. Maybe we can form an unlikely alliance on the issues that we face. But I want to make a serious point, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the business secretary about some of what he said in the past, because it does go to these issues. He has said a number of things about climate, and I have been part of working on a cross-party consensus on climate for getting on for 20 years in this House. And I have to say, some of what he has said about climate, questioning the modelling, questioning whether there's anything we can do about the climate crisis. It's saying in 2017, if we were to take action now to try and stop man-made global warming, it would have no effect for hundreds or thousands of years. The cost of climate action is probably unaffordable. I quote those words, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is, I'm afraid, flirtation with climate denial. Never in the last 20 years have we heard these words from someone in charge of tackling the climate crisis. We should not normalise this. The bipartisan consensus on climate change has been hard won. We have worked across parties over 2 decades to secure it, and there is a heavy responsibility on the business secretary to be part of maintaining that consensus, not destroying it. And the problem for him, and the reason why he faces this challenge, is this is not just about the climate crisis. Because if we don't take action on green energy, it is a recipe for higher bills. The ban on onshore wind is driving bills higher, gas imports higher, and terrible for the climate. The blockages on solar, which the Prime Minister supports, are driving bills higher, gas imports higher, and is terrible for the climate. The refusal to act on energy efficiency is driving bills higher, gas imports higher, and is terrible for the climate. And I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is nothing more anti-business than scaring off investors in renewables with climate denial. Now, here is the truth, and I'm concluding, Madam Deputy Speaker, here is the truth about this new government only 2 days in. I believe they have revealed their true colours. We face a social and economic emergency. In such an emergency, what matters is who you stand up for, who shoulders the burden, and the choices you make. They have chosen to stand up for the oil and gas companies, not the British people who will pay for this in the long term. They cannot answer the challenges of energy security. They cannot answer the challenges of energy bills. They cannot answer the challenges of the climate crisis, and they have the wrong priorities for Britain.
Secretary of State Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I begin by adding my voice to those of honourable and right honourable members about Her Majesty the Queen and wish her well from this House. It is a matter of the gravest concern to all of us when our sovereign is unwell. I also want to congratulate my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, not only on her appointment, but on the way she has chosen to meet this energy challenge with immediate and decisive action. I thank her for introducing this debate and ensuring that the contents of her speech were not leaked beforehand, which is a proper respect for Parliament, and to see that her policy has been robustly debated in this chamber. But I also want to thank the Chancellor, my predecessor at Bays, for paving the way for this announcement to take place, and I'm looking forward to working very closely with him to ensure households and businesses are protected this winter and beyond. And I should also like to thank the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Shadow Business Secretary, for his kind words about me in his opening comments. Indeed, we have had a friendly personal relationship over some years, so I hope we can continue that, whilst having no doubt a less friendly debate sometimes on these fundamental issues. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to understand why we are here. We are here because Vladimir Putin has weaponized energy supply as part of his barbarous attack in Ukraine. Last week, he turned off the main pipeline to Europe, and it is a deliberate blackmail tactic against the West. Britain's energy system must be strengthened and diversified to protect our homes and our businesses. And as we have heard over the course of this debate, our plan comes in 2 parts. First, we must get our constituents safely through this winter. We know how concerned people are about expensive energy bills, and some of the projected figures have been truly alarming, and we are intervening to stave off an unprecedented crisis. It would be wrong to stand by as people struggle. And I can give the assurance to the Honourable Lady, the member for St Albans, that our plan for businesses will include care homes. That is fundamentally important. And it would be madness to ignore other businesses too, as they see their bills spiral out of control. So, the new energy price guarantee will ensure bills are kept down, remaining at around £2,500 a year for the average consumer. This intervention reflects the severity of the situation we find ourselves in. And the government-funded support will take effect from the 1st of October, saving the average household around £1,000. This will be combined with the original support that we have announced. And so I can reassure the Honourable Member for Kilmarnock and Loudon, who raised the question first, that we will be acting to help the people on the lowest incomes. The government has already announced a package of support that will see 8 million of the most vulnerable households receive £1,200 of one-off support to help with the cost of living, and all domestic electricity consumers will receive £400. And we know that from biscuit makers to bars, businesses are worried about their bills. And the government price guarantee for businesses will be announced shortly, will bring down energy bills for the acute phase of this crisis. All businesses on variable contracts whose fixed price contract is coming to an end, all those businesses who have agreed a fixed price contract recently, will be eligible to enter the new government guaranteed contract. This will apply to businesses of all sizes and include schools, nurseries and care homes, as well as manufacturers and retail. That is the short term. And quite rightly, members of the opposition, particularly the Leader of the Opposition, asked who is going to pay for this. Well, the energy bills guarantee is not a direct loan to customers or to energy suppliers. However, as the price stabilises in due course, the government will need to consider when and how to recoup at least some of the cost of the scheme. And the opposition are all for taxation, Madam Deputy Speaker. This shouldn't surprise you, actually. As you know, the inner workings of the Labour Party are probably better than most. But nonetheless, all we get from the other side is tax, tax and tax again. It may be that we are at the highest rate of taxation in 70 years, but the answer is always more tax. It is their only answer to any question. Even the honourable gentleman, the leader of the SNP, who used to be a very successful businessman and therefore may know a thing or two about this, was advocating higher taxes, but now he's a humble crofter. Perhaps he thinks that is easy. I give way.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Member. We go back a long way. And he, of course, is right to have a background in the city, but he no doubt has read Shell's quarterly figures as I have done. If from the top of my head, the return on capital employed has gone up from 3 to 13%. By anyone's definition, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's excess profits. And it's right at a time such as this that we take our share of that.
Hear, hear. It is structurally wrong, Madam Deputy Speaker. Taxes need to be certain. If you are to encourage investment, and we need investment in this country, the tax policy has to be set for the long term. You cannot retrospectively pick people's pocket. You need to tell them what the charge will be beforehand and keep it clear. I'll give way, certainly, to my right friend.
Would the Business Secretary like to remind the House that the Republic of Ireland chose deliberately much lower corporation tax rates than the rest of the advanced world and collects a far bigger proportion of its economy in taxes on business than we do?
Yeah, good point. My right honourable friend will be glad to note that the Chancellor of the Exchequer from a sedentary position is agreeing with him, and my right honourable friend is a higher authority on this than I am. But we know that the cut in corporation tax led to an increase in receipts. Higher taxation is not the answer. So, looking at the long term, we must fix our broken energy system. We must have energy independence and become a net exporter of energy by 2040. We cannot be held captive by volatile global markets or malevolent states. We must tackle the root causes of problems in our energy market by boosting domestic supply. Now, this is investing in renewable energy with vim and vigour, accelerating the deployment of wind, solar, and particularly exciting, I think, hydrogen technologies. So to reassure my honourable friend, the member for Pendle, we will invest in nuclear technologies, which also provide us with cheap and clean electricity. And I note my honourable friend, the member for Ennismon, was saying it is known as Energy Island, and that's exactly what we need in this country. My honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, notes, we are not just in Ismond, but the whole of the United Kingdom is energy island, and so we must use all the resources available to us, including, as my right honourable friend, the member from Maidenhead said, tidal energy. This is a great opportunity. I would love to give way, but time is very short. We are fully committed to green growth and the green industrial revolution and to net zero by 2050. But we've got to get there, and to get there we are going to need oil and gas. So we are going to have a new oil and gas licensing round, hoping to launch it in October. And I want to reassure the honourable gentleman for East Antrim that we will work with communities and individuals to use shale gas as well, with the support of those who may be affected. So the pause on extraction is being lifted through a written ministerial statement, which will come into effect immediately. This will allow us to gather further data on seismic safety, but it is fundamentally important. As any economist knows, pricing is set at the margin. If you have more, it helps bring prices down. That is fundamental, and it is not in any way contradictory to what we have been saying before. We will also have legislation to support people in Northern Ireland, which I think is fundamentally important. We must be one united kingdom in how we do this. I am very grateful for the many contributions made during the course of this debate from my honourable friend, the member for Worcester, my right honourable friend for Central Devon, right honourable friend for Forest of Dean and for South Northamptonshire, my honourable friend, the member for Bolton West, and my right honourable friend, the member for Preselic, Pembrokeshire. My honourable friend, the member for East Surrey and for Watford, my honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, I've always mentioned, my right honourable friend, the member for Basingstoke, for Innismon, for Dudley South, and for Sevenoaks. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move this motion on the order paper.
Before I put the question, just to say I'm very sorry that all honourable and right honourable members were not able to get into the debate. It was very oversubscribed. And also a reminder that it is important to get back in good time for the wind-ups in order to hear responses to what people have said. The question is that this House has considered UK energy costs. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And before we move on to the next business, I do also wish to pass on my thoughts and best wishes, and I know those of the people too, of Doncaster Central, to Her Majesty the Queen and her family. We now come to the motion relating to the Social Security Special Rules for End of Life Bill, Lord's allocation of time. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Social Security Special Rules End of Life Bill, Lord's second reading.
You say no.
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 Sorry.
No. Minister, Secretary of State Chloe Smith to move second reading.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. May I also say it's a pleasure to do so in this role, and may I welcome the new member of my ministerial team, the Honourable Member for Banbury, who will be taking later stages of today's bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, finding out that your illness cannot be cured can be a frightening experience, and as a government we are committing to doing all that we can to alleviate the pressures facing those who are nearing the end of their lives and their families. To provide some financial security to those who find themselves in this difficult position, the Department for Work and Pensions has, since the 1990s, provided access to key benefits via what is often referred to as the special rules. These are benefit rules which enable people who are nearing the end of their lives to get fast-track access to certain benefits. Historically, those eligible under these rules have not had to wait as long to start getting benefit payments. They've not been required to go through medical assessments and in most cases have qualified for higher rates of benefit. In order to access this fast-tracked route, people had to be assessed by their healthcare professional
as having 6 months or less to live, and this became known as the 6-month rule. For more than 30 years then, these special rules have ensured that at this most difficult time, people have got the financial support that they are entitled to quickly and easily. But of course it's the case that since those rules were first introduced, there have been significant advances in how the NHS treats and cares for people nearing the end of their lives, meaning that many terminally ill people are now living longer. Given these advances, in July 2019, the Department launched an in-depth evaluation of how the benefit system supports people nearing the end of their lives. And as part of that consultation, the Department worked with those people and those that support them and clinicians. And the evaluation's findings show that there was consensus across all groups that the government should extend the current 6-month rule. It showed support for the DWP to adopt a 12-month end-of-life approach that would allow people in the final year of their life to claim under the special rules. An added benefit of the 12-month approach was that it would also bring greater consistency with the definition of end of life used within the NHS and across government. And I give way to the Chair of the Select Committee.
To the Secretary of State for giving way. Can I be the first to congratulate her on her appointment?